Okay. Hi, everybody. My name is Nerd Slayer. Welcome to the Six Pixels Under podcast. This is episode 7. This is the first week we will have a guest on the show. And that guest, if you guys don't know already, is going to be Indigo Gaming. He's joining us right now. And the reason why I wanted to talk to Indigo Gaming specifically right now, especially, was because of all of the Fallout 76 stuff. TES 6 on the horizon, another Elder Scrolls game, and there's just so much to talk about just between those two things alone. So I really wanted to talk to Indigo Gaming because specifically I see him as what I would describe as, in gaming terms, an expert, especially in things Bethesda. He has long-form essays and videos on Fallout content, as well as Elder Scrolls. He just most recently did like an hour and a half, 40 minutes or so video on Elder Scrolls, talking about the entire game history, and even had interviews with the original creators of the game. And basically, long story short, he's qualified to talk about Fallout things and Elder Scroll things, as you guys will find out. He also does other videos on, I guess, more obscure titles. But also did more popular videos on Diablo and Hellgate London. So welcome, Indigo Gaming. You're my first guest. You helped me set up everything. I appreciate that.
Hey, no problem, man. Thanks for having me on.
Okay, so let's get right into things. As you guys can see, we've kind of jerry-rigged this, I guess you would call it, outline of sorts. Or he said he's a designer. I didn't give him enough time, so it's all. No, I'm just kidding. It's my. I waited to the last second. Let me see if I can find a way to put the chat, guys, because I see you guys are talking. I might need to. I might go top right. Does that look good for you guys? Limpos said first guess, hopefully not last. Yeah, hopefully it'd have to go pretty dang bad in order for that to happen. But anyway, so Fallout 76, the things that I wanted to talk about with Fallout 76. First, let's just start from the very beginning. I'd like if you would talk about your history with the Fallout franchise, and just, I guess, talk a little bit about it before we get into talking about kind of where Fallout 76 is now, and its problems, or what's good about it, or possibly what it means for the future.
Sure, yeah. I'm an oldie, so my first exposure to Fallout was actually way back in the day, probably 96, 97. I saw this obscure Interplay demo back when demos existed, of Fallout, and what they did is I now know what they did is they actually took a small section of the game, like one town essentially, and made that into its own miniature world, and it was altered from the actual game. But it was one of the most amazing experiences I had had up to that point, because they took a fully interactive town with NPCs. There's a shopkeeper, there's like a sheriff, there was like a gangster, and all those kind of guys. They all had their own little, you know, uh interactions, relationships and stuff. The sheriff didn't like the gangster, but the gangster kind of ran the town. And everybody was, you could mess with, you could talk to, you could convince, you could kill, you could rob. And so it was almost like a interactive wasteland town simulator. And I thought that was the coolest thing ever. Being probably early teens at the time, I didn't end up buying Fallout, but I bought Fallout 2. Or actually I got it for Christmas, I think. And that actually came with Fallout 1. They used to do that a lot, where the second game would come with the original. So I ended up playing them both a lot. And that was my first exposure. So I was kind of there from the beginning. And I didn't so much get into the later games. They made Fallout Tactics, which was less of an RPG, more of like a tactical squad game. More so kind of like a Jagged Alliance or XCOM, actually. I did play it later, but I didn't play it much at the time. And they did like a console spinoff, which was almost like it was supposed to be kind of like the Baldur's Gate spinoffs, like I think they're called Dark Alliance.
Right.
It was around that same time, around that same era, where they're taking they did that with Baldur's Gate, they did it with
EverQuest.
EverQuest,
Yeah.
and they did it with Fallout.
Champions of No Wrath. Yeah.
Yeah, they did the same exact thing with all three of those games where they made an action RPG spinoff for like the PS2, Xbox, stuff like that, GameCube. I was excited about that, but it didn't end up being that great of a game, so I didn't play that much. And yeah, when I first heard about Fallout 3 being taken over by Bethesda, I knew Bethesda had a fantastic track record for RPGs up to the point. Up to that point, they'd done, Arena, Daggerfall, uh, Morrowind, and Oblivion.
Right.
So they had a really good track record up to that point. Uh, and so I had really high hopes. The trailer looked amazing. The original trailer for Fallout 3 looked amazing. Um, when I got it, I actually I had some sort of deal at GameSpot at the time. When I got it, I got Fallout 3 and Far Cry 2 the same day, and I played them both, and I probably liked Far Cry 2 better for some reason. Like it just I liked there were certain things I really liked about Fallout 3. I mean, the VAT system where you see slow motion, guts and gore, that's totally Fallout. That's totally, great. But I was constantly stumbling over the combat because they turned it into a shooter, but it kind of pretended to be like a turn-based RPG at times. And
Right.
I felt myself getting frustrated with the shooter mechanics because it wasn't as good as like a shooter.
Right.
But the VATS mechanics seemed too exploitable, where I just like hide around a corner, wait for the action points to come back and whatever, and rinse and repeat. And probably it's not a game breaker, but probably the one moment that kind of made me realize that Fallout 3 wasn't like an old school Fallout game was, which I mentioned in my video, was Little Lamplight, where you're put into an area and you can't actually even draw your weapon. You're forced to interact and argue with a bunch of kids with like BB guns, and you can't actually even threaten them. You have to do what they say or convince them. And I thought that was pretty cheap. I mean, I know why they did it for censorship reasons, but to contrast with the original games, say like Fallout 2, there was actually an area in Fallout 2 called if I get it mixed up, I think it's called the Hub, where little children would run around like, Oliver Twist style and rob you if you weren't looking. And they could even steal quest items.
Hmm.
And if you weren't paying attention, they have like a little animation where they grab at you for a second and run away. If you don't notice that, you could actually lose a quest item.
That
And
reminds me
so what
of I don't know if did you ever play Zelda? I think it was Majora's Mask. They had that little bird that could fly around, and if it hit you, it
Oh
could steal
yeah.
something from you. It could steal
Yeah.
the like legendary sword from you. I remember that because it happened to me. The Master Sword. It stole the Master Sword from me one time. We don't see that
Yeah.
in games anymore these days. Those sorts of mechanics
No.
where you could lose
No.
like the Master Sword, like that just doesn't happen.
Yeah, that's how games are made. They're made like, oh, it makes sense that a kid would be able to steal any item from you because it's like they treated every NPC in there like a player character, sort of. So
Right.
like any player character could be robbed, or you could plant items on there. Like there's one guy who beat Fallout 2 in under 20 minutes by planting like TNT on people and like blowing them up and like completing like a quest and going up like 10 levels or something like that.
Hmm.
Anyway, long story short, I don't want to rag on, but yeah, I played Fallout 3, played Fallout New Vegas. I was really interested in New Vegas because a lot of the former Fallout 2 developers were on that, including, you know, the director of Fallout 2, Chris Avallone. He wasn't, I found out later that he wasn't like actually a hands-on designer, but he did a lot of the lore of which it was based on, and he designed the DLC packs. But I mean, Josh Sawyer was the project lead on that, who had, done Icewind Dale and was also a Black Isle Studios veteran and stuff like that. So I really enjoyed the freedom, and they didn't pull any cheap tricks in New Vegas, as far as I know. It felt a lot more. It was the same Bethesda engine, so it still retained some of those flaws, and it was a very, very quick and rush production, like under 2 years.
Right.
So it was definitely had some technical issues, but it felt more true to the original's spirit, I guess. And then when years later, when I played Fallout 4, they kind of, went more even further than Fallout 3 as far as, taking player choice away. So at that point, I was like, kind of not super happy with the series. And that's what kind of led to inspire me to do that Fallout video, where I would go over the entire series. And yeah, I did that July, I think, last year. And it's just about to pass 1 million views now. And weirdly enough, I've been since Fallout 76 was announced. People have been coming back to that video and saying, "Wow, it went for worse than you could imagine."
Yeah, that's
So
kind of why I wanted to like, I guess, have you build the whole premise of it is that you've already talked about these games and specifically Fallout for a while, and you've obviously been involved. Being a player of Fallout 2, but then also going through the whole process because I never played Fallout 2, so I kind of came in around Fallout 3. And Fallout 3 for me was strange because I remember it being like very, very hyped and mega hyped at the time. I was a big Elder Scrolls fan, had been since I could play Morrowind back in like '04. And so I already knew obviously of Bethesda. And once they got the license, I was like, oh, I guess this will be kind of cool. Like, I don't really know what to expect from it. But from my perspective, coming from, I think at that time it was Oblivion was already out, right?
yeah,
Before
Oblivion
Fallout.
is based on the Oblivion engine. Oblivion came
Right.
out 2006. Fallout was '08, I think. Yeah.
Right. That's what I remember too. Is from my perspective, being the Elder Scrolls player coming from Oblivion, and then being like, this feels like Oblivion to me. And I had no experience with the Fallout world before that, so I mean, it really was just like my first time experiencing it, and it just felt like, oh, so this is just like a Fallout, or this is just like a post-apocalyptic version of Oblivion. Like, I really didn't know that Fallout was this, big game or whatever else. And it's funny because looking back, most of my criticism still stands. Like, I still think the game, as you've already mentioned, it clearly uses the same engine, which gives it the same problems in many ways, especially with its combat being kind of, I mean, not even kind of, it's very lackluster. Like, you could tell, it reminds me of ways of Mass Effect 1, where they were still using Unreal Engine, but they're trying to make an RPG. And so they were having like all of these technical issues because of that. And so for the second game, they were just like, all right, we'll have to use another engine and we'll just go all out action. And so like people complained, right, whenever Mass Effect 2 had like I guess an over focus on action combat. And people say the same thing about Fallout 4, I think, to some extent. They might think that it's a little bit too action oriented, but I almost see it as like a natural progression, right? Went from Fallout 3. I mean, in some ways, like I know some people would probably vehemently disagree that it should be a natural progression because maybe they didn't care if Fallout 2 became a third or a 3D game with action combat or whatever else. I could see that argument. Like Wasteland is still the same game, right? Like it's still the old school, RPG experience, CRPG experience, whereas Fallout has now become obviously this worldwide phenomenon. But I think, I don't know. Would you say that you think that it's kind of a natural progression in some ways, especially if you take into consideration, obviously Bethesda got the rights to make the game. I guess at that point we kind of already knew it was going to go down a certain path of events, right? I mean, we knew it wasn't going to be the same experience. Obviously, I think that much was apparent.
Yeah, I think they kind of tried to impress upon old school Fallout fans that it would be true to the originals, but in a lot of ways it is. Like, a lot of the ways they did, they took the original, famous heavy armor, the, power armor design, and they did a lot of things to kind of impress this theme. They got the original voice actor to do the intros, war never changes,
Right.
things like that. They definitely get the theme across, but it's been a long I don't know if you've talked about this. You may have done a video on this, but it's how RPGs have changed over the years, particularly combat. Combat in RPGs used to be all about your character stats. You know, your attack was governed by your character's, accuracy, their damage, their weapon, the enemy's defense, etc. Um, Even in the Elder Scrolls, that has changed a lot.
Yeah.
Up to Oblivion, you actually had to connect your attack, but when you swiped at an enemy, you didn't just hit. It did a invisible roll to see if you actually hit. So your stats would then be calculated versus the enemy's stats, and the resistances and stuff. And for example, Oblivion, you could be like swipe, 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 hit. Even though you're 5 feet from them or 3 feet from them, right?
Right. Morrowind, right? I think it's
Yeah, Morrowind was the last one to do that. Oblivion made a big change in that whenever you swiped at an enemy, you hit them. Your skills would only just affect how much damage you did.
Right.
So it's a transition from, the old school, percentage chance to hit D&D style to more action combat, you know, like more like action RPG combat, whatever. And history has shown that action RPG combat is immensely more popular with the mainstream. So from Oblivion on, you saw games, more so about your actions rather than your character's stats. So that isn't necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
A lot of people prefer post Oblivion combat to Morrowind and Daggerfall's combat, but um, yeah, like you said, Fallout 3 basically took Oblivion and repainted it and added slow mo, you know, VATS, the kind of slow mo, attack the head, attack the arm, or whatever combat to it, which is cool, but it felt kind of like a weird. It felt kind of forced,
Right.
considering that it's now got this action combat where if you shoot something, you hit it no matter what. So it's kind of that transition. I think it's gone more and more toward being a pure action game. I mean, we see games like Fallout 4 in particular, and it seems like Fallout 76 might be even more so, where it's more about it being a shooter with some progression elements and open world
Right.
elements rather than being RPG. So I think
Yeah.
that's
Sorry, I was gonna say it that whole process that you talked about makes me think about the concept of, as a game or a franchise becomes more popular. Obviously, like you mentioned, action combat it typically resonates more. It's more exciting. It's more visceral. It's easier to sell, I think, in a cinematic or whatever else, a trailer to somebody to sell gameplay that's exciting and interactive or whatever else. And what I find interesting is that with many of our favorite RPG series at this point, it seems like it's almost like a natural progression towards more of a gameplay focused. I should amend that. I should say more of a action oriented gameplay focus. And you can see that. I mean, the example I brought up earlier with Mass Effect, from Mass Effect 1, the game was called, I would say it's probably like an adventure slash RPG game with action elements, whereas Mass Effect 2 is an action game with RPG elements. And that's sort of my point, is I almost feel like at this point, and you see this with Fallout and to some extent Elder Scrolls, that it's become less about that, and now it's started to evolve into the next level where it's I don't know. Do you agree with that or disagree with that?
Oh, completely. Yeah, I forgot that you mentioned Mass Effect. That's a great example. The Mass Effect 1 had non-combat skills. Not many people remember that, but they had like diplomacy and
Right.
skills that would affect conversations and things like that. Like there was the I haven't played those games forever, but it's not Spectre, it's whatever, like high class
Yeah, it was
character.
Renegade and then Paragon rankings, and then you had your Renegade level would affect your ability to intimidate or whatever, something like that, and then Charm
Yeah,
was
yeah, exactly. Yeah, different skills like that. And then there was a skill specifically for the rank of I don't keep on thinking Spectre, it's something like that. But yeah, it's that rank of in the alliance that you're able to achieve,
right.
or or
Yeah,
actually the
Spectre's the name of
international.
it.
Yeah, Spectre. Yeah,
Hmm.
there were levels in that, and that would give you extra conversation abilities, kind of like in games like Fallout or Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines, where you'd get new conversation options, and that helped you actually role play, your character more, because you
Right.
could be more of a, brain dead, swole, run and gun, combat guy, or you could actually talk your way out of situations more. And so I think Mass Effect in a lot of ways was one of the last true RPGs from uh, BioWare. I think once they saw the popularity of that, for one, and also the response to that in Mass Effect 2. Mass Effect 2 is, in my opinion, a more enjoyable game in terms of combat for sure, but
Yeah,
they
for sure.
definitely lost the illusion of role playing and choice, I think, in some regards.
Yeah, and
Yeah, yeah, go
okay.
ahead. Sorry.
I was just gonna say that it seems like in some ways, like, because when I wanted to talk about Fallout 76, the reason why we're kind of building it up to talk about Fallout 76 is because I didn't want to just dive directly in there. I wanted to give people kind of I guess, the history of the franchise up until that point to some extent in a condensed form, but also because that's another thing that kind of goes with it that people need to understand. It seems like systemic at this point that a lot of the favorite RPG series at this point are going to be kind of action representations of themselves. And yes, there's still CRPGs to some extent, but I mean, even those are evolving in terms of gameplay. If you look at what Divinity has been able to do, and I think it's great what they've been able to do. But it's like the thing that I want to talk about before we get right into the Fallout 76 stuff specifically is kind of like the concept of, is it just a natural progression for RPGs to kind of lose a little bit of their immersion as they make, big steps into gameplay aspects, I guess, in terms of their design? Like when you start to focus more on gameplay, for some reason it seems to do something with the lore, the world, and also like the way that you can be immersed into the game. I feel like it almost takes you out of those things, even if it makes you necessarily feel more epic or whatever else as you're playing the game. And I wonder if it's because, like I said, of this natural progression towards being more popular, being, I guess, casting the wider net, so to say, so you're not as focused as much on narrative or the ability to impact conversations. And now look at the majority of games these days have Mass Effect, again, great example of the dialogue wheels, where they have these like wheels where you only get like, 3 or 4 options, and then it's like the options that you get, they're paraphrased, so you don't even know if you're gonna say the correct thing. And that's, to me, like the biggest sin at the moment with the Fallout games is the most recent ones, Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, is like you'll see something, you say it, and you're just like, wait a minute, that wasn't what I thought I was gonna say. And it seems like we're losing control of our character, our PC, but we're getting more control in other ways, like our ability to fight and our ability to customize the way that we fight. I guess, do you think that this is kind of does this have to be, I guess, is this just natural that the best RPGs or the best stories are going to eventually get some crazy AAA version of it that's going to abandon some of its original tenets? Because I kind of feel like, if you look at the market, it seems a little bit systemic at this point, right?
Yeah, I don't think it has to, but I think by company, it's a business, so when you develop a product that's successful, the next step is to make a better product that's even more successful. The reason, and it comes down to numbers, and it's easier to widen your audience to get bigger numbers than it is to just simply expect your audience to grow. So, like, if you target the hardcore turn-based RPG audience, that unfortunately right now is kind of a finite market. There's only so many people that are going to like it. If you make an amazing game, you can kind of expand that market, get more people interested in that market, but realistically, you're only going to really hit that market, head on. But if you then cast a wider net, like, to people who like, crafting games like Minecraft or whatever, I almost bet you that Pete Hines had something to say about Fallout 4 and said, "Hey, Minecraft's popular, add that into Fallout 4." You know, that I would actually bet money that was a conversation that happened, and it got a lot of press, got a lot of interest from that. People spend hundreds and hundreds of hours making their bases and things like that in Fallout 4. So, going back to Mass Effect, I think that it's interesting that Mass Effect I think it's the earliest example of that wheel, but it honestly does it better than most games, I think. But that little dialogue wheel is kind of a perfect reflection on how simplified, or how forced and unorganic RPG conversations have become. When you have to limit it to, at least they had a Mass Effect had a wheel of sometimes like 5 or 6 options, but by the time it got to Fallout 4, it was like literally 4 button presses.
Right.
And
And
that was
sometimes two of
actually,
them don't even change the way, like it's kind of like those air quotes or whatever. It's like you
yeah.
say something, but they still act the same way. So you're like, I don't know if I'm actually saying anything different here.
Yeah, no, it's actually become a meme and I love it. One guy did this really great, I think ProZD did a great video where it's like it was the 4 button presses and one button was hello. So you press that button and the character says, "Hello, a-hole. I'm gonna kill your whole family for fun." And it's like, whoa, whoa, whoa. It's like
Yeah.
like that's not what I said. But Yeah, it's become kind of a joke at this point, especially with some games where you say no, but you really mean not right now, or yes later, or whatever. It seems kind of false.
Right.
And I've actually watched the behind the scenes with Emil Pagliarulo, who was lead designer for Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, and he basically saw Mass Effect. He even says this in his talk. He saw Mass Effect. He saw Telltale Games, which is kind of interesting, ties into recent events.
Right.
And he's like, "Oh, 4 buttons. That seems simple." And that's literally the thought process behind Fallout 4. Just going for the bare minimum simplicity, not thinking about the long term problems that would face. And I even heard about some developers that worked on the project kind of having a problem with forcing 4 options all the time. Like, it's arbitrary. Sometimes there should be 6, sometimes there should be 2. You know,
Right.
just the idea that you would have 4 options there, like a sarcastic option. You don't necessarily need a sarcastic option there. If it's not going to actually change the course of dialogue, it doesn't necessarily need to be there. So I think it's the idea that you're trying to shave away any rough edges that would turn away a potential wider market. I think that's what eventually causes RPGs to simplify. And yeah, I mean, investors call for that. They want more money, they want more sales. So I think it's an inevitability if you go for the largest quantity of sales over the highest quality game.
And like, I don't like to be doom or gloom about it, but I certainly feel like this should inform the way that consumers make their decisions in the future. Like, I made a video about this and that story is never going to be sexy to tell, but it's the story of all of our favorite, developers, our old favorite developers, companies or whatever else. They're not really the same anymore, and they haven't been for the longest time. And I feel like a lot of people don't recognize that, but it's kind of like when people were shocked that Fallout 4 kind of had these plot holes and basically, if you've beaten the game like I have, it just it couldn't even scratch the surface of what New Vegas was able to do storytelling wise. And I think that was like a big problem. But then the settlement system, the gameplay, all of that seems to somehow balance out in the big scheme of things. So it's almost like even as they continue, Bethesda as a company, as they continue to make quote unquote worst RPGs, they're making better, games commercially. So it's so hard to have the same expectations of them as a company, and even as like a diehard fan of Fallout or of the Elder Scrolls franchise. But I have to say, especially as Fallout 76 is kind of right on the horizon, it makes you get a little bit scared about what the future holds for both of those IPs, which are obviously very popular and well-known IPs. But I think it's also maybe this will cause people to start to pay attention more, and that's if we were surprised by Fallout 4, then we probably weren't really paying attention, because I mean, Bethesda, in terms of its ability to storytell, it hasn't been that company, in some time, and not to say that it's ever really been that company, because that's the thing is like Morrowind is kind of this like lightning in the bottle. I feel like story wise, it has amazing lore, which in my opinion, the lore is what makes the game. It's not the story, it's not the main storylines. It's just the lore. Like the world itself is so believable within obviously its own rule set. And there's so many different ways that you can play the game, and there's like tons of parody in Morrowind too, which I love that. I mean, spoilers, you're basically a god, right? And that can reflect itself in the gameplay, but it doesn't matter, right? Like, because the game is still fun, it's still believable. And I rarely ever see a game handle like a player ability spike that well, like Morrowind does. But anyway, I digress. But I certainly feel like at this point, we might have to start to see a little bit of writing on the wall that we're not going to get the traditional RPG experience, I guess, at this point. But is there something still salvageable there? And I guess that's what the main question is going to be after seeing how Fallout 76 does, because I'm convinced that it kind of sets a bad precedent in some ways. Because what it seems like to me, to switch the conversation out of Fallout 76, what it seems like to me is it seems like everyone knows the story. I think at this point, who's seen or who has seen the No Clip documentary, I think Fallout 76 had. If any of you haven't seen it, I would recommend watching it. But they basically talk about how the engine obviously wasn't designed for multiplayer, so they had to go talk to their Quake Champions team to basically id Software to help them create, I guess, version of their server or engine that would work, in a multiplayer setting. And so we know that was kind of very jerry-rigged and last second. I really am not convinced that they've been working on this game very long at all. I don't think it's been long at all. And I think that's the most apparent thing for people. Like, maybe they don't understand why they're having a weird reaction to Fallout 76, but I feel like in a lot of ways it doesn't feel like they've put the same level of care and time that because, flaws or not, Fallout 3, I would say, had a lot more care put into it, obviously, than Fallout 76 at this point. But I can't help but feel like with Fallout 76, they were kind of Todd Howard was was sitting in his office and he was just like, you know what? I want to sell the new Elder Scrolls game as a co-op game. Let's go ahead and figure it out, guys. Right? That's the conspiracy theory at this point. But I mean, let's just start from Fallout 76 just as a game itself. Like, what are your thoughts on Fallout 76? And do you think that a multiplayer push at this point for either the Fallout universe or for Bethesda in general, do you think it's kind of in line with what they were going to naturally progress to at this point, especially if they're trying to push the boundaries that much more in regards to maybe how much money they're going to make or how many people they're going to impact? Or do you feel like it was just kind of almost like an accident thing that they just ended up saying, you know what, let's just kind of finish it out and see what happens? Because really, I think that they can get away with launching a half-ass game. I really do. I think if Fallout 76 launches without enough content, it'll be fine. People will complain, but they'll forget about it in a couple of months as, Bethesda puts in a bunch of new content, right? But sorry to nail down my question specifically. What are your thoughts on Fallout 76 as a multiplayer game? And do you think it means anything, I guess, good or bad for the future of Bethesda and the types of games they want to make with either Fallout or Elder Scrolls?
Well, you talked about so many different things I kind of want to hop onto. Let me just
Yeah, no
go
problem.
through this real quick. It's interesting with that they had to design their engine, the creation engine, to work with online with many players, because ironically, Gamebryo, which I believe the game still shares some code, or at least was based off of, or forked off of at one point.
Right.
Gamebryo uh, was originally released as NetImmerse, which was an MMO engine. It was an MMO engine, which
That's
I find
funny.
hilarious. They've moved so far away from that code, probably in good ways and also bad ways, that they lost the capability of multiplayer. Yeah, Morrowind was pretty much just straight up Gamebryo. So Morrowind could have been an MMO. That's the same engine that they used for Dark Age of Camelot. Gamebryo, a later version of Gamebryo. So I find that funny that they've gone so far, done a 360 back to the original, where they're not trying to make an MMO out of it. But yeah, Morrowind was really interesting. One thing that people don't always realize is that Bethesda Softworks, or Bethesda Game Studios now, I guess because they split, is not the same company as it was 2 years ago, as it was 5 years ago, as it was 20 years ago. Every single game, kind of like I kind of compare it to like a movie production. A movie production is basically a company. Like, The Matrix 1999, it was basically a company. You have all these people in the specific setting, in the specific organization. You have these producers, you have these directors, you have these writers, these actors. That whole production is basically a single company, and you'll never get that same company again.
Right.
Even if you get the director back, he's going to have a different writer, he's going to have a different editor, possibly different, director of cinematography. It's not going to be the same thing. It's not going to be the same exact, way of making movies or whatever. And games are a lot like that. No other game had the same crew as Morrowind, and the same setting, and the same need to succeed as Morrowind, because Morrowind almost killed Bethesda. They were down to 6 staff at one point during Morrowind's development. Todd Howard's even on record for saying that. It's but they needed to succeed, and they had really an amazing creative vision. And Michael Kirkbride and Ken Ralston, those kind of people. Ken Ralston has been doing D&D modules since like the 80s. Like he's a hardcore RPG enthusiast. You know, Michael Kirkbride had crazy cool, Lovecraftian ideas and implemented some of those. Like all the weird stuff in Morrowind is basically Michael Kirkbride. He had some weird stuff. He's also a really good artist, so he was able to visually imagine stuff in the game much more so than the later ones, or arguably the earlier ones too. But so that's lightning in a bottle is partially due to those people being in that environment at that point in time. So fast forward to later, it definitely seems like they're trying to move to multiplayer. Multiplayer games have a much more active community, and they're like living organism. I mean, from covering so many MMOs and being such an MMO enthusiast, online games are so much more of a living organism than a single player game, and because of that, you get a lot more post launch window sales, and there's a lot more opportunity because of the strict restricted nature of the games. You have on private servers, for example, there's only one way you can get law item, and what if you put a price tag on that item? There's a lot more monetization options, a lot more your I mean, how many copies sell weekly of World of Warcraft, a 10-year-old game? That's insane. You can't really get that from single player games, really. I mean, we joke about how many, dozen times Skyrim's been released. That's kind of a unusual. That's kind of a freak of nature at that point. But
Hey, you got
MMOs
to
and
stop
online
buying the
games.
game, right? That's the only way to stop Todd from selling it. Stop buying
Yeah,
Skyrim, guys.
Todd's literally said that. We wouldn't sell Skyrim anymore if you stopped buying it. But yeah, so there's a lot of factors in that, and Fallout 76 definitely seems like it is a spinoff. It's not Fallout 5.
Right.
So,
I think that
and
much has to be established right off the bat. It's clearly not some standalone,
yeah,
full developed project. Like, there's no way they could have turned it out in that amount of time if it was.
yeah, but on the other hand, you have to think that if this ends up being really, really successful, Fallout 5 will have multiplayer. There's no question about it.
Oh yeah.
I said a quote in my Elder Scrolls documentary that I kind of liked when I was talking about Skyrim, saying like, well, I don't agree with the direction, they cut this, that, and that. They simplified this. They made the world smaller, you know. But on the other hand, there's nothing about 23 million sales that says you're on the wrong track. Nothing about selling tens of millions of copies says, hey, maybe you should change something. It
Yeah.
says to people that people want this. So I think the reception of a lot of series actually, Elder Scrolls Online, Fallout 76, and even the latest Mass Effect, those three games we've been talking about, series and franchises we've been talking about, the latest entries have been very poorly received. They've been getting a lot of criticism and stuff like that. And they used to be bulletproof franchises. Mass Effect was a fantastically received, very well respected franchise. Elder Scrolls was like they couldn't do anything wrong.
Yeah.
They made some spin-offs that weren't the greatest, but the mainline series has been like, game of the year, game of the year, game of the year, like every single time.
Right.
Uh
And not just like game of the year, but like get game of the year, like a super
yeah,
blockbuster experience.
for sure. So with Fallout, Fallout 4 was definitely criticized post-release for dumbing things down, and they gutted the skill system, turned it all into perks, things like that, and made it more shootery. The dialogue system was heavily criticized. Even Todd Howard admitted that wasn't the greatest choice afterward. But um, I've not seen a game yet by Bethesda get so much pre-release criticism than 76. So it seems like between the really rough launch of Elder Scrolls Online, which did a lot of things, and a lot of it's turned around a lot. It's not a bad game anymore. It's definitely still an MMO, so it's not you're not gonna it's not a replacement for a true Elder Scrolls game, but it's a
Right.
pretty good MMO, all things considered now. Uh, but between the horrible, anti-hype train against Mass Effect Andromeda, and now we're seeing something similar with Fallout 76. I think there is a consumer pushback, but the thing is, we see people on Reddit, we see people on Facebook, on Twitter, we see people on YouTube pushing back against this, but that only represents a very small
Yep.
hyperactive consumer base.
Right.
A vast majority of the people are going to say, that looks cool, pre-order. So in the end, I mean, there'll be some ups and downs, but I mean, why is Call of Duty still like the best-selling game every year? If people got sick of it 10 years ago, they obviously that our pushback against these games and how samey and how they make bad decisions or ruin things. We represent a very hyper aware part of the market,
Right.
which doesn't necessarily represent the entire consumer base. So it's hard to say exactly what will happen, but we definitely have to speak with our wallets if we expect any change, for sure.
And that's kind of where I think the scary precedent's going to be regarding all of this, is that I'm with you in that I hear everyone saying, oh, this, and IGN's coming out and saying, oh, Fallout seems so lonely, and these other, journalism, I guess I would call them print. Are they even called print media anymore? I don't even think you can call them that anymore, but traditional gaming outlets, I'm not sure, but I've seen a couple other
gaming press. I don't know. Yeah, I mean, they don't even really print
Right.
anything other than the Game Pro does, I guess, still. But yeah, traditional gaming media, I guess. I don't know.
Traditional gaming media, yeah. And so even some of them have said things like, the game's not going to be what you expect, or it's not going to be this, or I haven't seen. I'm with you. I haven't seen that much negativity on a Bethesda game pre-launch than I've seen with Fallout 76. That being said, I truly don't think it's going to matter. I really don't think it's going to matter. And what I mean by that is that you kind of summed it up for me, and this is a topic that I go over pretty much on every MMO I ever cover, and that's that there's a difference between commercial success and artistic success. And at the end of the day, you and I mainly care about artistic success, which is why we're critics, because there's no incentive for us to be commercial critics unless we're going to get advertising money from one of these companies. So there's no, like, that's what, basic media is, really. It's all about commercial success. So, content creators, YouTubers, people like us who spend 10 plus years playing games to some insane level of detail and going back and playing the games over and over again. We are a strong anomaly, especially compared to the general audience. And so it kind of makes me think, if I've talked about this topic multiple times, but I really feel that commercial success and artistic success in some ways are meant to fight against each other, that they're meant to always kind of squabble amongst each other. But it seems like in the past 5-6 years, specifically, maybe even a little bit more than that, it seems like commercial's been winning. It seems like for AAA games at this point, there's plenty of indie titles out there. I know people are going to go to the indie market. The indie market's supposed to innovate at this point. We kind of expect them to do the risky things, which is weird because they're the ones with less money. They're the ones with far more to prove in many cases. They also don't have pre-existing IPs to rely on like big AAA companies do. But I mean, shit, to bring up the example of, to bring it back to the MMORPG market, if you look at the top most popular MMOs right now, they're also the biggest IPs, which is just, I mean, it seems like a no-brainer. Of course, the biggest IPs with the most money are going to have the most successful MMO, but we're starting to see, like, in some ways that commerciality or whatever else is sort of like taking over. That's becoming the status quo. And the reason why I think that Fallout 76 is such a bad precedent in this way is that I think that most people, there'll be a little bit of crying and complaining, and surely from people who don't want to be PK'd, surely people who want the story experience. But Fallout 76, to talk some details about it, it has the settlement system. You can build anywhere except for, I think, the towns in the game. You're not allowed to build there, where you get your NPC missions. Sorry, I say NPC missions. It's more like drop-off missions. You get them from a computer or something, which is like totally... Okay, let's just talk about that first. How do they go from having... Okay, so in my opinion, NPCs in the RPG market have become... like, they've almost like regressed in terms of their progression. Like they first started as, you look at early games like EQ1, you had NPCs that had schedules. They walked to certain areas. They had tasks to do during the day. They were programmed to have a life. And then NPCs became lore bots or info dumps, and then quest givers, and now basically both. And then all of a sudden a Fallout game comes out that launches with no NPC because they're just like, oh, screw the NPC, we'll just make it a computer, because that's basically what it is anyway. It's not actually interacting in the world. It's just going to, give you a quest and say the same lines or whatever else. That part, I heard a gameplay experience, and this is a loose quote, but he said something along the lines of, my experience in Fallout 76 so far has been very lonely. I went from talking to an NPC, talking to a PC, like an actual computer, to talking to a Dropbox, to talking to a computer, to completing my mission, basically, is what he said. So there's really no point that they don't just put an NPC in there anyway. Just make it like a typical Bethesda NPC, like a Morrowind NPC, where it's like an encyclopedia or a dictionary of data, and just at least make it to where you can interact. Like, I just don't see the point to not include NPCs. Like, why do you think they're doing that? Why are they not including NPCs in Fallout 76?
I mean, from Todd Howard's presentation, the high concept was, how cool would it be if an RPG was completely played by players? And I on one hand, I can kind of see that as a high concept being amazing, but on the other hand, I've played video games before. So I've been on Xbox Live, I've been on MMOs, I've been on IRC
Did
channels.
somebody perhaps bang your mom on there as well? Because I encountered that one a couple of times as well.
a few thousand times, yeah. It's the lack of immersion with talking to people online is absolutely staggering. So the idea of replacing any semblance of a living, breathing world with players and expecting that to at all represent or even imitate a RPG is mind-blowingly naive, I think. Again, the idea is cool. If somehow everybody role played, or if the game forced people to not act like idiots and spam things on chat and just dance, and do the whatever, the floss or whatever the Fortnite dance is, like, on repeat, I could see it being interesting. But yeah, at this point, like you said, the technology is there to add NPCs. I mean, we've gone from, and again, I don't sound like an old person, but Daggerfall had 750,000 NPCs in its world. It had like the population of a small country in the world. Like it had cities that actually spanned like square kilometers. You know, it felt like, and obviously it's very, very old and very uh outdated, technology and things like that, but it approached simulating a real world up to like real world scale. So that was pretty awesome. We've now gone from that to having no NPCs, and I just feel like, and one point I really want to make, as far as, I feel personally like they're trying to play down like Todd and other people. Like, to be fair to Todd, one of his first interviews, he outright said in an interview, I think it might have been with Jeff Keighley or somebody, that no, there are no NPCs in the world. And people were like trying to play that down. It's like, oh, that's not a big deal. And I'm like, no big deal. Explain 5 minutes of gameplay in Fallout, even Fallout 3 or Fallout 4, that you did not encounter an NPC. That was the game. You got quests from NPCs, you escorted NPCs, you killed NPCs, you stole from NPCs, you traded with NPCs. I mean, that was your bread and butter of the game. So taking that element out, it's got to have gigantic consequences. I mean, yeah, you still fight monsters and ghouls and super mutants and stuff, I'm sure, but that's such a huge factor of the game. And to play that down to a point and saying, yeah, we're retaining the original gameplay of Fallout 3, Fallout 4, and that you can play it single player and the experience is fine, I think it's highly misleading. And I think they know people are going to freak out about it. So they're trying to play it down and say, hey, we've still got the classic Fallout gameplay, classic Fallout 3-ish gameplay. I just don't think that that's going to translate it. Always online and private servers. I mean, you literally can't play it single player. You can go solo. You can go out and kill guys on your own and get fetch quests given to you by apparently actual computers.
But yeah, FedEx quest given to you by a computer.
Yeah, you can do that, but I don't think that's whenever I hear stories from people talking about how great Fallout, any of the Fallout games are, especially, regardless, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or New Vegas, people always talk about the characters. They're like, it wasn't so cool when you got, this thing from Mr. House, or when you talked to this ghoul over here, or when you spoke with this nightkin, or, they're
Even
always
the whole
talking about,
synthetic storylines in Fallout 4, like I wasn't the biggest fan of the game, but I even like how they tried to humanize synthetics and made that a plot line. And that's been in sci-fis for, years and years, but that sort of plot line is even interesting too.
yeah, I mean, maybe if we all were, top tier, like if we all were on, what's that popular tabletop show, Critical Role. If we're on like Critical Role, and like I don't know if you watch that show, but it's like,
Seen it
they play
before.
D&D and stuff like that. If we're all like acting out a character, role playing and stuff like that, if every single player was acting like that, that could be cool.
Hmm.
You know, People were actually acting like scavengers, like traders, like bounty hunters, actually acting out in a way that is natural and in lore with the world. But that's not going to happen. You're going to have people saying, you're going to have griefers, you're going to have trolls, you're going to have people sitting next to you while you're fighting a gigantic mutant bat just dancing. You're going to have that kind of thing happen. So you're not
Right.
going to get the replacement of an actual world. You're just going to have a bunch of people goofing off. So yeah, I don't think it's going to be the same experience. Will it be fun? I mean, is going out with your friends in a nuclear apocalypse with machine guns and shooting a bunch of things fun? Sure.
Right.
But I don't think it'll be at all a replacement of what most people got out of the game, which was, a somewhat shallow but still immersive and enjoyable,
Right.
action RPG experience. So I don't think it'll be the same.
Yeah, and it makes me think about. I think I agree with you in that I can see what they're going for. The idea of no NPCs, in theory, it sounds really cool, but I don't know how to say this without sounding slightly insulting, but it's kind of one of those theories that, how when you're a kid and you think about something and you're just like, man, this sounds so great, but like you don't actually test it or apply it to reality or the rules or regulations of reality. It seems like one of those things where you're just like, I mean, someone like me, for example, I love PvP and I love MMOs. And PvP in MMOs has been a big issue in many different games. And one of the biggest issues that you'll find with PvP is that if just like in real life with real laws in the real world, if you don't penalize people enough or give them incentive to do good or not do evil, they're going to basically try and get away with as much as they can possibly get away with. The problem with Fallout 76 for me is that the PvP just seems like it's just tacked on. Like it just seems like they just included it because they're just like, oh, why not? Just leave it in there. But it's like, what's the real use of the PvP? As a PvP player myself, of course, most people will just assume that anybody who's a PvP player just wants to gank everybody incessantly and doesn't care about anything or whatever else, right? I get that a lot. I get people even like telling me that I'm a ganker and I'm mean on my video. I've gotten that before. I'm like, wait, you don't even know me. How do you know if I'm the ganker? But they just assume that if I like PvP, I'm the ganker. Well, my PvP perspective on all of this is that what's the point? If there's no point, then why am I going to PvP? Like, there's actually the great thing about the Fallout universe is there's tons of reasons to PvP, right? For example, surviving, right? That's the biggest reason to PvP is that if you're in some post-apocalyptic universe and mutants are attacking you, you're going to kill mutants. But if humans are also like, well, the mutants have a good point, well, then you're going to have to kind of kill the humans that are assisting them as well. Even if you're, mankind is coming out of these bunkers or whatever else. Yeah, we're all part of mankind, but just like in the real world, we're not really on the same team. Like, we're the same species, but we're not really the same species. We have our own families, communities, or whatever else. And I just like, that's the thing that I don't understand is that Fallout 76, did they not learn from ESO? I feel like they haven't learned from ESO in regards to not including the actual world part. Because maybe, I don't know, maybe it doesn't really matter because ESO is doing just fine. But that's the part for me that's just a little bit crazy is the Fallout 76. A lot of the, I guess, drama around it is PvP. Like, people were saying, oh, you can be killed. Basically, as far as I know so far, you pay a certain amount of caps based on whatever bounty you have from killing other players. Players don't drop anything except scrap or resources, which you can use, obviously, to build things in your settlement. So, but what else? There's no NPCs, so the NPCs aren't going to protect you, right? Which is a very, very, like, since Ultima has been a very effective way of stopping players from killing players within a town. Ultima had it to where you could kill a player, but it wasn't like you couldn't just assault the city. Like, the guards would kill you eventually, and they would kill all of you eventually. But you could certainly steal and maybe run away, right? Things like that. None of that exists within Fallout. And the way I think about Fallout 76 in this regard is, like, they wanted to go for a sandbox approach. They wanted to have, like, the sandbox Fallout experience, which, by the way, sounds awesome in theory, but I don't think that's what we're actually going to get. And I don't know if we'll get that at some point or not. I mean, obviously, they're not going to give up putting content into the game, and they're certainly not going to give up in trying to make it as best as they can. But if we can learn anything from Sea of Thieves, they recently launched with a very similar plan to Fallout 76, where it's, like, dynamic, and sometimes you have players in your instance, sometimes you don't, and it kind of comes in and out. So it's like that weird system where we don't really know how many players you're actually playing with. That's the funny thing about Fallout 76 in the news, is if you ask them a question like, so how many players are you going to play with? They won't give you a straight answer. They're just like, well, could be up to this amount, or could be, it's like, so, like, we're trying to figure out when does it kick in? When do we get the group amount? And I don't know if you've played Sea of Thieves, but it has the same type of concept, except Sea of Thieves, guess what problem it ran into? It also didn't have enough sand in the box. It didn't have enough sandbox features to keep people playing the game. And I personally played the game, and I can attest to that. Had really cool aspects to the game, but those were super repetitive quests that were basically, which is a bit ominous, but basically the same kind of go here, get this thing, go back here kind of quest, which is basically what you're going to be encountering in Fallout 76. And sure, they say that there's a story there. Apparently the previous overseer left the vault 76, and you're trying to uncover what the overseer, uncovered or whatever else. But it's just like, that's not going to resonate really with players, because the thing in Fallout, in my opinion, that should resonate with you automatically is that you are in a wasteland, and really nobody's on your side. Like, you need to be skeptical of everybody, because people might be trying, like, when you get approached in Fallout New Vegas really early on by Caesar's Legion, or don't they call him Caesar or something like that? A couple characters call him that.
Yeah. If you're a follower or if you believe in them, you call him Caesar. But if you, like, don't really care about them, you call him Caesar. It's interesting. You'll actually find where people's loyalties lies depending on how they pronounce his name. It's kind of interesting.
I didn't know that. But you'll get approached by a character like that right away, and they just, like, strung up some dude, and you're just like, wow, that's it. But right away, you know where you stand, who these people are. They're not objectively good by any stretch of the imagination, but you're still afforded the ability to be able to join their forces or whatever else. And they have a lot of really interesting plot lines too within that. But I don't even know what to say at this point. But Fallout 76, it's like a sandbox without the sand. And I don't know if they can get the sand in it at some point. I think that they will add NPCs, though. I think that they'll get enough pushback to where they'll eventually add them.
Yeah, I think it might be kind of a Destiny situation where, all this is promised, and then Destiny releases and, like, yeah, we're missing stuff, and then they eventually add it into DLC packs and stuff. It'll probably be like that.
That's what I'm thinking.
3 to 5 years down the road, it might be an amazing game. Who knows? But at launch, it looks incredibly technically inept. I think Digital Foundry was reporting on the Xbox One X, which is the most powerful console available to consumers right now, single digit frame rate drops. Like, we're talking under 10 at times. Really, really bad performance. Really weird use, like 2005-esque use of, like, bloom. Excuse me. Of, like, a really, like, overbloomed areas and some other graphical issues and stuff, and instability, performance, lack of optimization in some areas. But at its core, I mean, and this is the thing that I actually almost want to do a video about it. there was a point when Bethesda was ahead of the curve. I think around Daggerfall and Morrowind, they were pretty much on top of their game. You look at other games around that time, they were like nailing it. Morrowind was not only a really good RPG with really good lore, it was also one of the most technically impressive games of the time. It was one huge zone that only had slight instance load times, like occasionally, but it was a incredibly seamless, incredibly expansive, all real time, all it was so immersive at the time. And other games around that time were, there were still, I think Wizards and Warriors was still kind of like the old school, um, Might and Magic and other games like that were kind of old school and still had 2D sprites and stuff like that. So for an RPG, it was really, really ahead of the curve. But more recently, developers like Bethesda have almost seemed to be reactive.
Right.
Like
Like they're
Fallout 4,
following a trend to some extent.
yeah, Fallout 4 is basically Fallout and, oh, right, Minecraft exists. You know, Minecraft, what came out like 2008 or something like that initially, around that time.
One
But
of the
Fallout 4,
best-selling games of all time, by the way.
yeah, yeah, sold for $2 billion, a minor blip on the map. So they basically said, oh, crafting games are popular, let's do that. Fallout 76 seems to be almost like an answer to DayZ or Rust, or those kind of games, just about 4 years too late, because
Yeah,
those games have kind of,
that's a good point.
yeah. People were actually ahead of the curve when thinking that Fallout 76 was going to be a battle royale game. Bethesda is so behind the curve that they're behind the trend that we think they're going to be ripping off.
It's like it makes me think that whenever they announced Fallout 76, they almost weren't aware of the responses that they would get. They were so out of touch at the time that it seemed like they were kind of like, wait, you guys don't like the idea of no NPCs? Oh, it's weird. You don't see the vision that we have, and it's like they've been like sitting in their hyperbolic time chamber, just like getting their idea ready or whatever else, and they come back and it's like 10 years in the past or in the future, and everyone's like, wait, is this a survival game? You mean like the 17 billion survival games that have already come out? At that point, I could see that.
Yeah, it actually does, and from what I understand, they're not really. I mean, there's like movie directors that say they don't watch other people's movies.
Oh
Like
yeah,
the
I've
guy
heard
who
that.
did, the guy who's done like Independence Day, he says he doesn't watch other people's movies. I've heard, and again, not rumor, whatever. But Bethesda's a bit insular, so they may not actually be really following the pulse of the where games are going, what people's responses are to them. And I think that it's a gigantic risk and could permanently damage their brand if they go with a very, like, Fallout 76 lives or dies by its community at that
Yeah,
point, just
100%.
like Rust, just like DayZ, just like Conan Exiles and any of these other games. They're completely community driven, and to put that much weight on your community and not have enough of a base foundation that would keep the game enjoyable even after a community lives or dies. Like, you can go back to play, Fallout 1, Fallout 2, Fallout 3, Fallout 4, Fallout New Vegas, and they're still just as enjoyable as day one. You know, the game is there, the structure is there. You
Right.
know,
The world is there, exactly.
yeah. If everybody stops playing Fallout 76, it's a shell of a game, just like an MMO. MMOs are great, but when you remove the players, like, it was actually really weird. I think I played Anarchy Online like 4 or 5 years after its heyday, and it was amazing how empty it was. Like, they expect you to have 1,000 players there, and there's nobody there, and it feels like you're in some sort of weird alpha state or something like that, because they design these games around having players there. So I think that'll be the test of time to see if Fallout 76 actually. It seems like it has enough things to mess around with that it'll have some sort of community, but I it is definitely highly reliant on who's actually playing it to make it an experience rather than it actually being a good game in itself.
Well, that's what begs the question and makes me think that your theory of them being kind of out of touch is really true in this regard. Is that, I mean, if you look at Conan Exiles, perfect example, Rust, another really good example. These games can be heavily modded, and almost, I mean, Rustfall, the server that we run in Rust, is basically a full conversion, like RPG kind of mod. where it's like you're basically playing kind of like an MMO to some extent. You can do a lot and you can change a lot about those games. But Fallout 76, it's so weird that Fallout, or Bethesda of all companies, launches a game. Well, first off, we have to address the elephant in the room, which is that in large part the reason why they've been able to continue to be successful is that the community has kind of always got their backs. I mean, since the days of Morrowind, I mean, it's still one of the most modded games of all time, and easily the modded experience is a transformative experience. That's how like insanely different it is. I mean, I think you've seen it, but I've played it even recently, and the graphical updates and changes that you can do. At the end of the day, you can't change the gameplay engine, which is certainly problematic. But you can certainly fix things like enchanting and magic and spell creation and balance all of that. All of these graphical mods and seamless world mods where you can actually see, like, I think Oblivion has a mod like that where you can actually make it to where the cities, there's no instance. You can actually just run around. And so these games, they're so moddable. And I mean, Enderal also came out on Skyrim, this full conversion like German mod where they put like insane amount of work into it to where it's basically its own campaign of sorts. They have this is already historical. Why is it that they're not giving players or fans of the community the ability to do this more so with Fallout 76? That's what I'm not understanding. Is like, yeah, we can build a settlement, but what if we can actually impact the world in some greater way that we can when we're using the tool set? You know, when we're building a single player module or whatever else. Like, there has to be some more interaction there. Maybe they can't do that yet. That's why it's not there. But that just seems like, I don't know, it just seems woefully underprepared at the moment. Because with what you said, there might be enough content right now, but I don't know if it's going to be sustainable enough in the way that they want it to be. Because ultimately, I think the reason why people push towards this type of game, and we've seen Amazon do that with their recent New World game as well, is because it's like emergent gameplay, right? It's like easy to have constant new content when the onus is on the players to create their content and they have all of the tools, whereas developers don't need to spend, like, you know, WoW has recently learned this again, because they've learned it a couple times with BFA, that when you rely on developer-made content and your expansion isn't that good, I mean, it's very like harmful to your brand and to your game, because that's what you need to sustain. WoW isn't a sandbox. It can't get by on just the same content, right? Like, you need new developer content. In this case, it's like Fallout 76. We're basically, we don't have a choice but to rely on them to give us more content. But I just seem like that to me seems like such a big mistake. Like, if they would have just given us more abilities to impact the world, design NPCs, design our own kind of quests, for example. These are all systems that exist in other survival games. It like, with what you said, I think it sums it up perfectly. It just seems like they're really underprepared and kind of out of the loop in regards to what other competitors are doing or have done already.
I 100% agree with you. It's also really baffling considering that Fallout 76 looks like it could be a mod for Fallout 4.
Water down the wrong pipe.
It's too much Fallout 76 could go down the wrong tube, huh?
It's actually not water, it's vodka.
Oh.
No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, I think we need something hard like that to get through this game. To back up your point, it's actually baffling because, I mean, they've had the creation engine since Skyrim, and you know, they didn't get all the modding tools day one, just like Morrowind didn't get all the modding tools day one, but they've had this engine, and there's been graphical improvements, and I'm sure there's other improvements that I am not 100% familiar with that have been added over, you know, Fallout 4, Fallout 76, and obviously they've added multiplayer, which adds complication to it. But why would they not have this community driving tool set
Right.
on day one? My answer is that not enough time.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe they want us to believe that Bethesda Game Studios is behind this project 100%. I think it's a very small portion of Bethesda Game Studios is working on this game. I think it's mostly Battlecry guys that are working on this game. It is I mean, they had Battle Cry. They were named after the game Battle Cry, that was going to be another hero action game, like Overwatch and stuff like that. When that game got canceled, they killed the studio, or they moved the studio over to Fallout 76, and I believe that was only like a year or two ago when that happened. So I think that's it's pretty much their baby, with some oversight by Todd Howard and some other people, I'm sure, but it's primarily a multiplayer game studio that isn't necessarily as familiar with the tool set as Bethesda Game Studios is. So there's that learning curve, just like we had with New Vegas. New Vegas, they handed their tools over to Obsidian, and they did a pretty amazing job, considering they had to learn a new tool set, new engine, and make a fully fleshed out RPG in, like, what was it, 18 months or something like that?
Right.
Which is a pretty tall order. Uh, but yeah, I think that's a similar situation, only now they're trying to do something new and different, which is to make a whole new multiplayer mode. But there's also a really, really big elephant in the room, which I've not gotten fully confirmed or not. But when you think online game with private servers only, we're living in 2018. So my first thought is microtransactions. If you've got an enclosed, a closed playing environment where there's even cosmetics or minor gameplay bonuses that you can put a price tag on, they're going to do it. I mean, they've monetized mods, with the creation club. They've done cosmetic DLC. Everybody gets down on the horse armor DLC. That is honestly pretty minor compared to what modern games do, but I can't. I would be absolutely shocked if they don't monetize the game somewhat. And with a private servers only with no mods, and they're saying it could be a year or more before that's in place. I saw an article where I think Pete Hines confirmed that it could be next November that we're going to see non-private servers enabled. So my thing is, either they're going to have to speed that up, or people are going to hack the hell out of this game and make a broken version that people are going to play online. Because like you said, I mean, there's transformative mods for Elder Scrolls and Fallout. I mean, there's mods that completely transform Fallout 4 into like a really, really difficult open sandbox survival game that at any moment you could be murdered by mines, or die of radiation, stuff like that. Like there's an entire, it's almost like a new game at that point.
Right.
There's a series of mods that are being worked on where they're going to make every single nation of Tamriel into one big open seamless world, like to the scale of Skyrim. That's being in development by just fans, and I've seen some of the footage and some of the things they've done, and it looks amazing. So it definitely helps, especially now that console support mods. It's a huge boon to the community when they're able to customize their game.
Right.
And so
and it gives them like an endless shelf life, and that's why, like, I really think that this game, especially after what you just said, it's obviously rushed. And especially like the way they're handling this beta thing. Have you heard about this? Where you can actually keep your progress, and so everyone's basically saying it's not beta, then it's early access. it's no different than early access. But Bethesda, like, I love them because I'll always respect them for Morrowind, but man, it's just like impossible to be a fan sometimes because of the things that they either do, say, or yeah, I would say between the things that they do and say, it's really hard to be a fan. I mean, obviously we love Todd, and he's a meme at this point, but that game is clearly too rushed. And I think that it just scares me that we could let developers get away with such a thing, because it means that they'll do it again, and they'll do it in the future, and they'll keep doing it, because as long as it works, they're going to keep doing it. And it sucks because it's like you said earlier, if you don't like it, in this case, you just obviously you have to vote with your dollars and not buy the game. But I don't even know if that's going to really matter, really, at this
stream off.
Yeah, I restarted it. I think I'm good to go now. I'm not sure why that was happening, but Sorry about that. All right, so I'll just have to. Damn it! I'll have to edit this one now.
Oh well.
It happens. All right. Anyway, I wanted to talk about the Elder Scrolls, and obviously we know about the speculation. There's going to be a sixth Elder Scrolls. That's not speculation, but the speculation. I've heard multiple types of speculation as to where it's going to be, as to what the name of it's going to be, and I guess I'll just start there. What have you heard about TES 6? And do you think there's any truth in any of the rumors that are currently out there? I guess.
I know that Elder Scrolls 6 will happen at some point in the future, and it's going to be the sixth game in the series. I just find it funny because there's people that literally hear like a headline and make like a 20-minute video about it and get like 1 million views on it because people are so wanting an Elder Scrolls 6, and that's the one thing that people will not get. This is now the longest gap between any Elder Scrolls game ever made, even longer than the gap between Daggerfall and Morrowind. When I saw the reveal, my immediate thought was Hammerfell is where it's going to be set.
I thought that too.
Just from the terrain. Obviously, there's part of Hammerfell that's very deserty, but there's also some arid mountain areas too, per the lore and other things. But also very brassy, very kind of harsh, kind of warrior like treatment of the Elder Scrolls theme song, also known as Nerevar Rising. And then I saw like that night people on Reddit like trends, like they're like triangulating maps and stuff like that, trying to figure out what mountain range and stuff like that. I don't know who to believe. There's been months of speculation at this point. And then there was the release about but this is the worst. They're absolutely the worst about keeping secrets at this point.
Oh yeah, for sure.
We've known about Starfield for like 3 years or something.
We knew about Fallout 76 before they were even ready to give information about it as well.
Yeah, we knew about Fallout 4 a while before they announced it. Supposedly Redfall was copyrighted by Bethesda. I don't know if that's the title, if it's a specific. Could be a mobile app. It could be whatever. It could be anything. It could be a Netflix TV show. Who knows? But I think it was technically a game. But it's from all likelihood. It seems like Hammerfell is pretty likely. I don't know all the facts, but Redfall, Redguard, looks like Hammerfell.
Right.
People triangulated it. It kind of makes sense.
Yeah, it's probably that or High Rock, right? Like, what else could it be? Not sure what else.
Yeah, people speculated High Rock as well. I'm not sure. I always thought High Rock was a bit more temperate rainforest. That looked more arid to me. Like for example, I grew up in Western Washington, which is temperate rainforest. Like we've got 365 days of the year, evergreen trees, green,
Right.
beautiful, a lot of rain, a lot of clouds and stuff like that. That's kind of how I imagined High Rock to be. Whereas I actually liken that part of Hammerfell more to be like Eastern Washington, which is over the Cascade Mountain Range, which is very, very different. It's like kind of arid, dry, rolling hills, mountains, things like that. That's my guess. It's all conjecture. I don't do speculation videos really. I just do hypothesis videos occasionally, but I have no idea what to expect. It's probably going to be at least 4 years out at this point, because they're still in production for Starfield. They normally don't announce games that aren't coming out within a year. They changed that a few years ago, where they'd only announce the game if it was coming out like within the next year. They actually violated that rule with Starfield and Elder Scrolls 6. So I can imagine Starfield coming out at least a year or two out, and Elder Scrolls being at least a year or two out from then, based on their release schedule. So, I mean, to put it into context, they've confirmed that Elder Scrolls 6 is in pre-production. So this is like concept art writing. Yeah, like we don't even know what engine it's going to be yet.
Right.
So I have no idea what to expect. I think we can expect the reception of Fallout 76 and Starfield to definitely inform the direction ES6 will take. I think I don't think they'd be stupid enough to violate their successful formula so far. I think it'll definitely have a strong single player component, but I think the reception to multiplayer and online will definitely inform whether they will have multiplayer in ES6. It's not a guaranteed, but I think if it ends up being a knockout hit, it could definitely happen.
Yeah, and I'm it's funny you say that about the speculation because I was looking this up obviously last night, and I remember when I first heard the different speculation, I was thinking, man, like it's just gonna be Hammerfell. It's just gonna be High Rock. Oh, that's so cool. And then like you look into it and you're like, wait, this is totally like you guys have invented this narrative based on the map, and you look at the dagger like fall map, like in this little part of here, and it shows like rocky, like it's that kind of stuff. It's like not real, nothing real to go on there other than just like speculation. So I'm with you. I'm not really interested in speculating, but if we were to say that it is Hammerfell, that's my next question then, is what could we expect based on it being located in Hammerfall besides obviously Red Guards, and could they do Red Guards have their own blades of sorts? Do they have their own specific organization? I don't know if they have their own, not police force, but like I guess specific faction, maybe like type of warrior. Maybe they could do some type of plot line along that lines, because I know Red Guards typically are they're typically going to use like long swords and stuff like that. I remember from the old Elder Scrolls games. So I wonder if maybe they could do that sort of plot line where you're a soldier kind of thing. Are they going to go for the whole Chosen One plot line again? That's really what I'm curious about, is that I feel like for being the Dovahkiin, I never really felt like I was him when I'm getting attacked or harassed by random bandits on the road, and it's kind of like, wait, if you guys know I'm the Dovahkiin, why are you trying to rob me? Like, there's so many inconsistencies with the whole Dovahkiin plot, but I also just think it's lazy. I mean, Super Bunny Hop did a video, which you've probably seen, where he talks about the main quest in Morrowind versus the main quest in Skyrim, and you're probably well aware of it as well because you've covered the games extensively. But it's like the difference between the funniest way he puts it in the video is there's a scene in which they're trying to explain the plot at the end when you're fighting. I'm trying not to spoil it too much for people, but when you're fighting the dragon at the end, where Bunny Hop remarks that even the character doesn't seem to care about his dialogue because the dragon or whatever just like roars over his dialogue and you can't even hear what he's saying, and then the music starts playing and you can't hear what the characters are saying, and that happens all the time in Skyrim. But that one plot made me just think, no one cares like what the plot is at that point. You're just like, I'm fighting a dragon, woo. But I really do hope, at least in some way, they can get back to kind of, I liked, Morrowind, you're a god. Like, okay, like I get that can be a little bit extreme, but the beginnings are very humble. I mean, we can both agree to that. Like, your beginnings are very, very humble. I mean, you're essentially like, hey, go here and do this. And when you show up, Kosades is like, here's some money, man. You're not ready yet. You're not a high enough level yet. And then you have to go out there and do some other quests. And then you come back and he gives you I think it's like he gives you the plans you have to drop off or whatever else, and you realize you're part of this organization and stuff. But it starts very like very humbly, I feel like. And it's also, you could completely ignore that quest line if you wanted to for the longest time. I mean, I don't think there's anything in the game that makes you have to do it at some point or not. So it's like you could do the whole other part of the game and then discover the storyline. And to me, that's like the coolest thing about Morrowind, is that there's this giant narrative that you could actually kind of ignore. But then once you discover it, you realize how interconnected the whole world is to some extent.
Yeah, Morwin's almost so open to a fault in that regard. I remember one of my first playthroughs, I actually snuck through the red wall, or I snuck through the wall into the Red Mountain, and actually snuck into the last battle with spoiler alert, Dagarthur, without doing any of the main quest, and I couldn't hurt him because I hadn't
Right.
done the main quest.
Hmm.
And I thought that was kind of awesome in one way that you could actually do all that, ignoring the plot line, but also sucked because then I realized I had like 30 hours of main quest to do before I could actually do it. But yeah, those games were really cool in that way, in that they didn't force you. It was actually almost like I said, to a fault. They didn't force you to go on their storyline. You could just make your own story.
I think to a fault as well, because I mean, ultimately, like if the dreamers are starting to all wake up and this is starting to become a problem, and the sixth house is rising, we would have a lot more things going on. So yeah, I think it is problematic in that way. And that, I mean, you should be getting attacked a lot earlier, for example, or they should be trying to like pigeonhole you into following the plot to some extent, because it is, if it's the big main narrative and the sixth house is rising again or whatever else, you of all people don't want that to happen, so they have to do a good job of communicating that to you as the player. But yeah, I do agree that in some ways it's a good thing. I remember my uncle got me the game, back in 2004, and I remember I had my map open and whatever. I'm trying to find where I'm supposed to go, because back then you actually had a game that you would open and it would have a map in it, and it was useful. I mean, without that map, I don't know what I would have done in that game. I probably wouldn't have been able to figure out where the hell I was going. But I remember telling him after playing for like 20 hours, I was like, I don't think you can beat this game, is what I used to tell him. Because I didn't know I didn't know there was a main quest in the game. I was like, I don't know if you could beat this game. I just kind of keep doing things and it just keeps going on forever. But it makes me think about how, in many ways, Elder Scrolls as a franchise has always kind of been MMO-like. I feel like you can't ignore the fact that it seems like it's like on the cusp of being an MMO within itself. Like you just add another player into the game, couple other players into the game, and suddenly you have a game that can be played as co-op, or even, in some ways like an online game. I don't know if you've heard recently about Morrowind has a multiplayer mod, and I've actually played it. And it certainly has problems because it's obviously very jerry-rigged to some extent. For example, you can reset cells by themselves. So if you mess up a part, like if you steal from somebody, you can just reset the entire cell. So that's a useful thing to have. But then the thing that isn't useful in that game is you never know when you steal. So it's like you'll steal, and then all of a sudden the entire Mages Guild expels you, and you're just like, oh man, and you can't really load back in the same way that you can. So obviously MMOs, especially a Morrowind MMO, has its problems, but I can't help but think the worlds of Elder Scrolls games make for really good MMOs, which kind of brings me into my next point. And it's kind of, so with Elder Scrolls 6, I think to myself, are we going to get that same scale of worlds, or maybe are they going to kind of try and make it a little bit more contained this time? I feel like that's not out of the question. I feel like if they are going with a smaller landmass, which we don't know 100%, it probably would be smaller unless they did other areas that you could go to. I wonder if they'll just go for a more kind of not rehearsed, but a more contained experience. And I feel like that might actually be better for them. And I know it's weird because it's Elder Scrolls and you expect, these massive sprawling worlds. And you mentioned earlier, Daggerfall had like 700,000 NPCs, and Morrowind had at least thousands, especially after the mods. And so I wonder, is that a good thing at this point? Maybe it's the best of the worst case scenario.
Yeah, it's really up in the air. I mean, I now see a pushback against open worlds, which I know what people are trying to say. People say like open world games suck. I'm like, I know what they're trying to say. I don't agree with the statement open world games suck. I think open world games are awesome. I just think that too often open world games are just a set of linear objectives separated by space. And if that's the definition of an open world game, I think that does suck. If you're just doing the same actions but in a different sequence, and you just have a lot of walking or driving in between, like get a lot of Assassin's Creed games and Far Cry games, and even GTA games are really guilty of that a lot, where you're just going to do this linear mission, but you have to drive 10 minutes before you get to do it. That's boring. I get that. I think open world games are more the prime open world game is, like you mentioned earlier. I didn't jump on that, but emergent gameplay. And emergent gameplay can be really, really can be helped by multiplayer, for example. Like there are amazing stories about, Eve Online and Rust and DayZ and stuff like that, where people like did a long con over like 6 months and got into this guild and did this whole heist and stuff like that. Those are amazing stories. but that's going to happen now to like 1 out of every million people. Those are require so many factors and human elements to actually occur like that. So you want that to happen to like most player. You want experiences of that caliber to happen to more players than just like 1 out of a million. So that's when your gameplay has to kind of inspire, I think, emergent experiences. And that's where you have like, random encounters or, NPC AI that reacts to other NPCs or, factions or things like that. Like they had a few of those in like Daggerfall and Morrowind, like, early on in Morrowind, for example. I think you get attacked by like a Dark Brotherhood assassin or something like that.
Yep.
Things like that kind of help, enhance you and kind of make your story your own. And what if you got attacked in the middle of the night and like one of the Empire's guards saw it and started fighting him? And cool things like that happen all the time in Elder Scrolls. That's part of the reason why they're so beloved. But from the standpoint of where things have been heading, I've noticed a definite trend, especially since I don't know if he's the only reason, but especially since Emil Pagliarulo, I can't say his name, Emil Pagliarulo
I'm
has
terrible with
been,
names too, so you'll get
yeah,
no solace over here.
I do like 20 takes when I did my video, but he started out as a games journalist. Actually, he did reviews, and then he, without any game development experience whatsoever, he got hired by Looking Glass Studios to work on Thief 2, and that was his in on the industry. And after that studio shut down, he got eventually came over to Bethesda, and he did the Dark Brotherhood quest line for Oblivion, which is actually really good.
It
It was
is.
one of the highlights of that game.
Sure.
I think he can be a good writer, but I think he's been given too much power because all the games he's been like leading, especially like he was lead designer on Fallout 3. He was he was senior designer on Skyrim, and he was, I believe, what yeah, he was lead designer again on Fallout 4. And I don't know. I mean, some of the writing just kind of sucks. I mean, it Fallout 4 was the first Elder Scrolls game where you actually played a named character. Most people don't realize that your character actually has a name, regardless of what you pick. Like they have a name for both the female and the male version.
Oh,
They have a
right.
backstory and everything like that.
Yeah.
The guy's an ex-war vet. The girl's a lawyer or something like that. They actually like they took that away from you. You couldn't even pretend to be like a thief or a bandit or a mechanic or whatever. You are, I forget their names now, but you are so and so war vet.
Someone in chat said Nate and Nora, so I don't know if that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, Nate and Nora. Yeah, exactly. Um, I think that I think, and it sounds really weird to say this, but I think Emil likes writing stories for you. And I think that's the biggest problem. Like,
I see what you're saying.
I was actually talking to Ted Peterson, who a few weeks ago, a month ago, something like that, my interview with him, and he actually was the designer, was a designer on Arena, Daggerfall, Morrowind, and did writing for all those and Oblivion. He's written something like 200,000 words of in-game books and stuff like that across the series. Like a good portion of the books and the lore you've read are from him. He's like really influential to the series.
Right.
Uh, he was talking about his earlier writing and stuff like that, where he'd write, all this dialogue. He was working on Terminator games, I guess. He'd write all this dialogue about Terminator games, and he'd get excited about it, and he'd hand over to the testers. And the testers would be like, enter, 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 and just like skip all of it. And he'd be like, oh, that was pretty good lore there. But then he realized that he was writing for like a book or a movie, not a game. A game should put, its medium first, and a game's writing should complement the player.
Right.
You shouldn't ever have, and I mean, as much as I like the games, probably Metal Gear Solid is the worst example of this, where you shouldn't have 2 hours of non-interactive gameplay, just force feeding story down your
Especially MGS4 or whatever. Like that one is particularly, like, I like the game, but it's like easily they have like 5, 6, 7, 8 hours of cinematics or something like that. It's like insane, dude. It's like most of the main story.
Yeah, at that point you're making a movie, not a game, and I think that the Elder Scrolls and Fallout games have been kind of leaning toward that to a degree where, hey, isn't this a cool little story? Isn't this a cool character? I bet you want to know what this person will say. Don't you want to hear what this person says? Isn't this cool? Like I get that kind of I get that kind of feeling off of, especially Fallout 4 for some reason. I get the kind of idea. It's like, hey, isn't this awesome? This is
Yeah.
Boston. I grew up in Boston. Isn't Boston cool? Aren't these accents kind of funny? Isn't this character quirky? Don't you want to know more about this character? And it's just like, no, I want to shoot that character. It's like, how
Yeah.
about I rob that character instead? It's like you kind of, I kind of like the sort of cold unattachment of RPGs when it's like, here's a cool character. You want to murder him? Go ahead. Like it didn't really feel, you didn't seem like it was playing favorites, like the biggest example in Fallout 4 is Garvey. He's become a meme now. It's like, another settlement needs your help, so and so. Probably 90% of players, throwing that number out of nowhere, but 90% of the players wanted to put a bullet between Garvey's eyes,
Oh, 100%.
Yeah,
It's like, stop
he
following me around and stop asking me to go help these settlements, man.
but they literally built an entire game mechanic around that character. They shouldn't have never have done that. They should have made, if they were going to do settlements and factions, how cool would it be to like say, oh, screw you, Garvey, bam, and go over to some raiders across the way and start a whole settlement thing with them and start creating like raider, outposts and stuff like that, or
Yeah.
shack up with the Institute or something like that. That would have been way more interesting. Maybe we're actually actively taking over uh, Minutemen outposts or whatever. How
Right.
cool would that be? But no, they designed this whole system around Garvey, so he's practically a mandatory character you have to babysit throughout the game. And I think that's the polar opposite of where those games started out as, where they were like, kind of like Mad Max, which it was heavily inspired by Mad Max, or A Boy and His Dog. That's another really good movie. Sometimes Mad Max would be like, hey, I'll trade you, this meat for some gasoline, or I'd say like, oh, I'm just going to shoot you instead. Like it could go either way. It's the
Right.
wasteland, dog eat dog. So I think that's long-winded, long-winded passage on where the games are going, and I could definitely see the game going down a more constricted route. It won't be completely constricted, but I could definitely see it be more a linear story. Probably going to wake up as a prisoner somewhere. Probably going to have some sort of vision or some
Definitely
high
going to have a
prophecy
vision.
about being like some prophesized hero or whatever. There's a lot of lore that they could go with. I think that it's definitely an interesting region. They've got a lot of kind of Arabian lore that they pull from, because most of the Elder Scrolls lore from the last few games have just been renamed Norse people, renamed this or that, the other thing. The only one that I think was really unique was probably Morrowind, but a lot of that was even pulled from Lovecraft and things like that, but it was still pretty unique. So I could definitely see it going that route, but I hope it doesn't. But it definitely seems the last three titles have been much more in the direction of, hey, how cool is our characters, how cool is our storyline? I bet you want to know what happens next, which I don't think is the right direction.
Yeah, it makes me think about recently we've had games come out like Kingdom Come Deliverance. We've had Pathfinder, Kingmaker Chronicles. We've had Divinity. Divinity's actually, in this case, it's a bad example, but I would say Pillars of Eternity 2 is a good example, Deadfire, where you're basically, in all of those stories, you're just like some random dude who's just kind of thrown into it. And it sounds like bad. Oh, I don't want to be the random dude. Like, where's the fun? No, that is the fun. The fun is that you get to create whoever you want to be now, so you can have whatever character you want. For example, in Pathfinder, they're like, all right, you're an adventurer. We need some adventurers to help. So can you come help us? And you're just like, sure. But you can totally answer that from the perspective of, yeah, I want to make money. Or, yeah, I want to be in power. Or, screw you guys, I'm just going to kill everybody. Or you can just be like, sure, I guess. Like, there's so many different ways that you can play those games from a roleplay perspective, but also just a gameplay perspective. Divinity, the reason why I thought about that is that I like how in that game you can kind of just blow the whole thing up if you want. Like, if you remember, we played at one point, and it was just like everyone ended up pissing off everyone, and so we had to like kill basically the whole city. But the game supported that. And I think that's why Divinity 2, like Original Sin 2, it's such a great RPG, is that you can play it really in so many different types of ways. You can listen to everybody and try and solve the problems. You can try and be the arbitrator between everybody. You can just say screw. Can't remember the name of the bandit dude, the bandit king's name or whatever. That Griff, that's it. It's Griff. You can help Griff. You could betray Griff. You could go kill the lizard that has the oranges that you need. You can steal the oranges. You can switch out the oranges. Like, there's so many different ways that you can play those, and it makes me, I guess, playing those games, it reminded me how much I liked just being the random guy who's just kind of thrown into the story. Sometimes that's what you want. That's like the most fun part of the game. It reminds me of a quote that some of the lead developers, at SOE at the time for Star Wars Galaxies said, and that was that they were like, oh, nobody wants to be a moisture farmer, everyone wants to be Han Solo and this and that. And it's like, actually, that couldn't have been more wrong. Like, the majority of people who enjoyed Star Wars Galaxies liked that you could be the moisture farmer or that you could be the pilot or the miner or whatever else. And with Elder Scrolls 6, at this point, I'm with you. I really don't see a way that you're not the chosen one again. But if they made it to where, for example, you're the equivalent of Aladdin or some shit, you're some like street urchin who just grew up, the harsh way, and he's trying to find his way in the world. That kind of storyline, I feel like it could totally work, especially because, as far as I know, and you could correct me if I'm wrong, but Redguard is very like Middle Eastern themed. Like their lore is kind of like they've got. Obviously, due to the clothing that they would have to wear, they're not going to be wearing like heavy sets of armor or whatever else, right? Because of the heat and the sun, the desert environment or whatever else.
Yeah, I get some of Arabian Nights kind of vibe from them. I'm not a lore beard, so I don't know everything about it. Some people read into like all the lore and know all this stuff.
Right.
I know the guy you could talk to if you wanted to know that kind of stuff, but this other YouTuber who does a lot of Elder Scrolls content. But yeah, I think they probably, what's cool about the actual Elder Scrolls lore, it's become more watered down as of late, but there are actually many different regions and subcultures of each region. Like, it was pretty much all, Nord kind of Scandinavian dudes and wooden houses in Skyrim, but there are actually like different, the lore alluded to different cultures and stuff like that. And even like Morrowind, that was all set on Vardenfell, but there was a whole mainland of Morrowind that had huge houses that you didn't even hear about, and you get to see the capital and tribunal, but like there was a much larger world outside of that. It wasn't just all copy and pasted, characters and things like that. So I don't know if it is Hammerfell. I don't know if they're going to go like all Aladdin, or if they're going to go more. They could do whatever. They could go more like, it wouldn't be the first time that they completely retcon an entire country or culture. Let's put it that way. I mean, even Morrowind was a huge retcon on Dark Elves. Dark Elves didn't look that way. They didn't have, I mean, even Dagoth was actually the name of the mountain, but they changed that to the name of the guy at the mountain. They changed it, renamed it, and various other
He was
things.
guarding the mountain or whatever is the story, right?
Yeah, and also another huge factor, which a lot of people don't underestimate the importance of it. Elder Scrolls lore is actually like Lord of the Rings. It happens over many centuries. So depending on which era of which country it's set in, for example, I believe in Elder Scrolls Redguard, the game, which was like what 97, I think 98. That is set on a small island on the coast of Hammerfell, right before the invasion of the Empire. So you could technically set it in Hammerfell before the Empire's control, or during a big war or something like that. That could be kind of interesting.
Yeah, like I thought of the same thing as you were saying that. That kind of goes back to what I was saying is like, they could create a faction within the Red Guards where you're some secret type of soldier or whatever else, or maybe you're just a normal soldier, but they can immediately throw you into a conflict and make it visceral for you. It also I know it's not really related, but it made me think about if they were to do like the Marshes and have it to where you play as the Argonians kind of
Yeah.
or with the Argonians or against them, depending on how you play the game. But as they're invading Morrowind, that would have always been such a cool like plot line for me, because we hear about that they sacked Morrowind, but to me, I'm just like, how the heck did they do it? I mean, of all people to do it, it probably would be Argonians to some extent, but it also would be Dark Elves to fall under such ruin, because they're so individualistic, even though, you know, they all say Inwall over and over again. But really, I mean, there's so many, like you said, there's so many tribes within Morrowind that it's no wonder that they couldn't unite all together in order to fight off invaders. But anyway, I digress. But I'm with you. I think maybe a persistent conflict could be a really easy way to start the plot, instead of making it like the chosen one thing. It's just you join the forces or fight against them based on the very early plot line of, you know, maybe you decide to help or run. Like that could be another thing. Like, for example, in Oblivion, Skyrim, why can't you just run? I don't know about you, but I would have just ran. If I'm playing my character, I would have just ran. As soon as I saw like the escape or whatever else, I wouldn't have tried to follow anybody, talk to any. I would just ran away and tried to get out of there.
Yeah, you could have literally run up the road that your wagon came down, you know, and just hightailed it. But you know, you have to, something falls down, crashes that way, and then it's like one person's like, "Come join me, the Stormcloaks. We need you, random prisoner who was about to get executed 5 seconds ago." And it's like, "No, you should come with us. We are the righteous people. Come with me." And it's like, it's so staged, it's so obvious. I mean,
Yeah.
It's and then obviously you kind of have to make it pretty obvious for certain people who don't really pick up on things, or people that don't. Well, one of the biggest problems with the current gaming industry is that games are so expensive to make. And so when you develop a mission or a area or a particular mechanic, it can cost millions of dollars.
Right.
And the last thing that people want to do is not have every single player experience that everything in the game. Which I think part of what makes games amazing is that I could play a game, you know, I could play Daggerfall or Fallout 2 or anything like that and have a completely different experience than you. You know,
Yep.
you could end up, you could be a slick talking gambler, and you know, end up recruiting, you know, this guy as your muscle, and end up like, you know, beating up, you know, merchants who happen to cross you in the wastes and stuff like that, and taking their goods. That could be your story. I could be a muscle bound addict of you know, of all sorts of, you know, strength enhancing drugs and jet and stuff like that, and you know, like win a prize fighter championship in the cities, and like, you know, punch things with my giant metal gauntlet or whatever, like. And then the next guy could just be a sharpshooter, or you know, a bounty hunter or something like that. Like, you could have all these different weird unique experiences. But modern games, they spend so much time on this, they're like, we got to have every player experience that, and that eliminates your effectiveness of choice, you know.
Yeah,
Like,
your agency as well, especially like you
yeah,
said, when it's like, hey, you have the choice, but you only can choose between these two guys, and it's like,
yeah,
why don't I just choose none? Why do I have to listen to why do I have to become oh, I know why I have to become the Dove King, because it's destiny. I don't really have a choice in this matter. But I can't help but feel like maybe what would be fun to see in the next Elder Scrolls game is just a change up of the formula. Like, instead of, and I know it's very unlikely, because big narratives, big grand narratives, especially war narratives, they're effective at immediately saying who's on what side, who's the good guys, who's the bad guys, and kind of keeping people interested into the plot. But I would even argue, have you ever played that mod, Auspicious Beginning? I think it's a Skyrim mod or an Oblivion mod, but it's where you get to choose the way that you start the game. So it's actually, I believe it's actually Oblivion is the first time I saw the Auspicious Beginning mod, but you actually get to, there's lore, well, they created the lore, the modders, but you can choose different beginnings, right? And so one, you could be like, I was the merchant. So like, you're in a shop or something and you have like a little bit of money and like higher mercantile skills. The other one's like, I'm some guard, or I'm a bandit. And so you're part of like, and so those really simple like things, again, that are created by modders, which have like a 20th of the resources that Bethesda does. Even that as a concept doesn't seem completely, like, I actually would support such a concept, I guess is what I'm trying to say. If anything, I want to get away from what you're saying, the same homogenized like experience where we're all the Dovahkiin, we're all this, we're all that. I would like a lot more variety, but I just don't know if it's going to be possible at this point. I really, if I had to make a bet, I mean, there has to be like what, a 3/4 chance that they're going to do another grand narrative. Like it just has to be. Like there's no way that they don't do it at this point. I
Yeah.
feel like.
No, I totally agree with you. I can see a shift going in it. It's due to like what's been successful, what's more of a guaranteed hit. Um, I think AAA games, 50 million plus games that are going to be churned out and hyped up and highly marketed, they have to have a reliable level of sales. And so, a perfect example of that would be like the latest God of War. Latest God of War, I haven't played it, but from what I've seen, is a very, very intense, enjoyable, highly linear, highly scripted action game. Really good, but you can read about your experience and your story from the Wikipedia article, and that's that's what's every single player is going to have that same experience.
Right.
I want to play a game where I can't spoil my experience from reading the Wikipedia article. Like I could read the plot and read the gameplay, but then go into the game and have a completely different experience than that.
Hmm.
I'd like to. I don't know if it was as much in the original game, but I installed this mod which combined all three Stalker games, which were these like post-apocalyptic shooter type games with RPG elements. They're kind of like Deus Ex in meets Fallout a little bit. Very technically inept. They had some trouble running. They're very difficult to get running properly. But this one combines the first three entire games into one world. And you could start out from 9 different factions, and it's just like that. You start out in this faction, you start in this area with this equipment with a different whole completely different set of resources at your fingertips, and you could have a completely different experience. Like that sort of I mean, in a way, Dragon Age Origins did that to a little bit. Have you ever played Dragon Age Origins? It
Yeah,
had
no,
that
it's
little bit.
fantastic.
Yeah.
That's the thing is like, yeah, like I understand the open ended experience that maybe you or I would potentially want more is maybe not as likely, but I think it's fairly not out of the question to expect something along the lines of Dragon Age Origins because if anything, the origins were the best part about the game. I created every single
I
type
agree.
of character in that game because I wanted to see what the unique origin stories were. So there's tons of replay value there. But again, you get into the conversation of dollar makes sense, and it's kind of like, what point do they have to do that when I'm sure at some point somebody will just mod it in anyway? where you can start as the non-prisoner for once, maybe.
Yeah, and I think just locking you into a storyline too early in the game, like, at least Skyrim had the decency of not saying what crime you committed, but like the fact that you're always a prisoner is kind of already narrows you into a certain,
Right.
field. But for example, for example like the opening of Daggerfall. You are in a secret meeting with the Emperor, and all you know is that you're an agent of the Emperor. What your specialty was, you have no idea. It's all up to you. You could be like a spy, you could be a thief, you could be an orator, or you could be like an assassin or whatever. But that was kind of open enough to kind of say I could have been some sort of like really sleazy cutthroat who just happens to be under the employ of the emperor or whatever, right?
Right.
Even that kind of narrows you a little bit, but it was a lot more open than you're a prisoner because you did something bad. Like, what if you were a noble? What if you were a
Right.
you could be anything. You could be, some rich guy who just, happened to be in this situation or whatever. Like, I like the idea that you could experience. I mean, that's a role playing. People forgot that role playing game means something.
Right.
Like, it's all about you carving your own path and having your own adventure. And it seems like the bigger the game, the bigger the budget. It seems like they want to narrow your experience down to the ideal experience,
Right.
whatever they deem that is, which I find limiting. And I want to find a game where I could start up and be completely surprised about.
Right.
I don't expect this narrative thing to happen because X Y Z. It
Yeah,
just gets a
like
little.
when the game becomes too scripted, it starts to feel less like an RPG, just on a base level. But to kind of go back to what you were saying earlier about a time sensitive quest to some extent, or maybe the idea of introducing such a thing, Pathfinder recently did that, where their first act is actually time sensitive. So you can do whatever you want during that time, but at the end of the day, you have to do it by this time because there's a reason, right? And that's one thing that's actually missing in mini games. It's like Mass Effect is a perfect example to me. The Reapers are coming, oh my god! And then it's like I'm on some random planet searching for resources, and then like killing 5 mercenaries, and it's like, wait, why am I even here? Like why am I not stopping the Reapers right now? Like I've always kind of struggled with those grand narrative games that also want you to go help, grandma, Jean with her pumpkins or whatever else. It's like, well, I feel like I should be doing something else right now that's a little bit more epic. But if you come from a more humble beginnings, like the beginning of Neverwinter Nights 2, if you played that game, you're just in some little town and you're about to have some like a festival. So you need to get ready for the festival, and so you're helping your parents and helping everyone around the town, and then all of a sudden, of course, something happens, and you're like, whoa, and it changes the whole plot. But point being is, I like how it starts from that very humble beginning where you're just some random dude in a town that it's like whatever else you can think of yourself is up to you at that point. But point being is that you're not super wealthy, you're not super powerful already, and you're not even that really important in the big scheme of things. You're just the adventurer, is the typical D&D story, right? You're another adventurer, so to say.
I totally agree with you. I remember this one line in this video that's all right. I did it 2 years ago. I think I could have done it better. But when I was describing Daggerfall, and I'm obviously a huge Daggerfall fan, can't get me to shut up about Daggerfall, but one of the things that game nailed better than just about any other game I played was that the world seemed bigger than you. You weren't the focus of the world. You just happened to be there. Like,
that's a good segue, by the way, but keep going, but that's a good segue.
Yeah, like the idea that you just happen to be in this world and there's bigger threats and more politics and betrayals and intrigue that's going on with or without your control. Like,
right.
A great example in that same game, one of your first leads to the main quest. That game is really hard to do the main quest, by the way. You actually have to pursue it. It doesn't force feed it to you. You actually have to go well out of your way to pursue the main quest of that game. You get a courier pushes a letter into your hand and you read it, and it says, hey, meet me at this town in this tavern before this date. And if you don't get there by that date, you lose that lead. Like, it's really interesting. Like, people have things to do. They're not going to wait, 2 years for you to show up.
Exactly.
They're there for a week. And if you can't travel there by horse or by foot by that time, you miss that lead, and that person isn't going to be there for you. Like, those kind of things are, like you said, when you have the time limits, and that's one thing that has been almost gutted from every single game now is time limits. Remember, like, Dead Rising had time limits. They gutted that, all those kind of things, which I find it interesting. Like,
you look at Majora's Mask. I love bringing up Majora's Mask as an example. It's my favorite Zelda game, but it's also the most controversial Zelda game because it has a plot line that's basically surrounding the idea that you have 3 days to complete the game. But what they don't tell you, of course, is that you can slow time down, you can speed it up, you can go back in time. So there's other aspects that kind of go into the game, but ultimately you're going to fail, but that's okay because you can replay the game. It fits the game, but and obviously that's a very unique scenario. Not most games aren't going to have systems that are, 1-to-1 like that. But still, the idea that you can just completely fail the game and the big giant moon falls onto the planet and you just die, and it's just like, did I just like lose the game? Is like how I would react as a kid. I'm like, wait, did I just lose the game? Like, what is this moon falling? And then you start realizing, oh, I'm losing the game because it's time sensitive. I need to go like get the masks or whatever else. I need to go to the temples before, this, that, or whatever else. And you realize if you're here at this time, you can get this mask. And if you're here at that time, it adds a total different layer. But at the end of the day, Majora's Mask is still considered, again, quite controversial because of that. So I would totally understand why they wouldn't want to do such a system, and just in RPGs in a broad sense. But I certainly think that, as you said, they've done it with Daggerfall before, and they have also done it with Morrowind as well. Like, not entirely, but they'll have quests that are like, come here at night and talk to me. Like, they have quests like that sometimes where it's like, you can find the mushrooms during the day, but it's like you can't find them at night or whatever else, or follow this certain area right at the river, and then you keep following that area, and eventually you'll get to the point that you need to get to. And whether or not it's day or night, you won't be, or when it's day, you can't see your target, and when it's night, you see your target there. Like Skyrim has done that sometimes too, where it's like, oh, meet me here at night, and you'll go. But it's more tailored. It's not in the same way like you said, where it's like, hey, meet me here at this time. Everything else is left up to you. When you leave, how fast you leave, do you know if he's even going to be there? Do you know if, like there's so many other questions that go into it versus I'll just follow this quest marker that leads me exactly to this person at exactly this time, no matter what. Like, what are you doing here all day? Like, you're just waiting for me. It's so strange, and it like breaks your immersion.
Yeah, it totally does. One of the games that actually does this weirdly, like probably the best, was probably the original Dead Rising. I don't know if you ever played that.
I did, but I
Um,
didn't beat it or play it significantly.
yeah, that game is hard, and it's almost impossible to beat it the first time you play it. It's a little bit like a roguelike in that or roguelite that you level up, and then if you die and start over, you keep your levels, but you start out with zero equipment again. So it does get you get a little bit better. But one of the coolest things about that game was its time system. At any point in time, like it says, like, hey, we need to face this guy at the food court by 4 o'clock, and the clock is ticking. If you don't make it there by 4 o'clock, he's not there anymore, and that quest line is over. Sometimes you'll be like, hey, we need to meet about these things, and meet me in the sporting goods at noon, and they'll give you like an hour window to meet them there.
Right.
And if you miss that appointment, you won't be able to meet with that person about that thing, and you might run across a survivor who's hiding out in the cafe on the way. And if you don't, you then have to choose, okay, do I try to save the survivor and hopefully have enough time to get back to this meeting place, or do I say screw the survivor and they could be dead by the time you come back?
Right.
Like that, those kind of decisions kind of like, and they probably stress people out. And
Oh
people
yeah.
probably didn't like them. But Dead Rising is an amazing game that way, because it actually feels like your choices matter, and that you literally have to weigh people's lives. Like, crap, this person's about to get eaten by zombies, but I have to be, on the other side of the mall in an hour. What do I do? Like, I don't want to let that person die, but at the same time, I've got a meeting to get to. So it's that constant kind of like, actual roles and decisions and things you have to play. And you might be more of a loner, but later on, you won't have as many people to help you out later. So it's things like that I find a lot more interesting than just, oh, this person will wait around for months. Like with Mass Effect 3, like they're literally attacking Earth at the beginning of the game, and yet Shepard has to bang every single, female person on the ship before. And, like it's ridiculous all the different side quests you can do before you attack Earth. And the Earth will be in the exact same situation it's in, no matter what you do. Like, how cool would that be? Is if you took too long, the Reapers would be that much more advanced, and he'd be like, "Oh crap, what did I
Right.
do? I let Earth get conquered." It reminds me of in a bad way, Last Jedi, where they're like being pursued by the Empire, and they go off and do all this other stuff, and then come back and they're the exact same situation. It's almost like a video game that way, where like there was no progress outside of your world, and that kind of leads me back to the idea that a game with a world that doesn't really care about you, a game that with a world that people have better things to do than wait around for you. That guy may not be there when you come back. That guy, this person may not wait, 5 months for you to, Fallout 4. You may not be able to save your child, and if you wait 5 years before going there or something like that, like things like that. And it's all for easy play and intuitiveness and not pissing off a wider audience, but at the same time, it kind of makes it seem like it's all sort of a scripted to you, like
I
you're the
think
only.
people especially notice that in MMOs. Funny enough, is I think it's very, very apparent in an MMO where you're just like, this dude literally just sits here all day and hands out quests, and he talks about, oh, the frontier, and we're fighting. And it's like, you're not doing anything, man. I'm sitting here watching you. You're just kind of sitting there, and I get it to some extent. It's obviously much more difficult to do it in an MMO like properly, I should say, especially when you take into consideration maybe NPCs could die or whatever else. If you don't make them like invulnerable, basically, which is what most MMOs do. They either make you invulnerable or like so impossible to kill that no one would ever try and kill you, which I think is a mistake. Actually, I like the idea of being able to attack a city, for example, to some extent, obviously. But I wanted to use this as a segue because recently there's been rumors surrounding ZeniMax Online Studios, which is obviously the online company that handles Elder Scrolls Online, or the online branch of Bethesda, I guess you could say. They're hiring for a new MMORPG, and obviously this is not 100% confirmed, but this is what I've read so far. I linked it in chat. It says they're looking for people with MMO development experience, strong technical knowledge of Xbox One, PS4, PC. Obviously, doesn't have any other information other than it's an exciting new IP. So that means that there's another MMO that's being worked on, which this like there's so many questions I have here. For example, why do Fallout 76 and then announce another MMO? That part's kind of weird to me. I guess it basically confirms it's not a Fallout MMO. I mean, right? Like, why would they do 76 and then do an MMO? Like, I mean, sure, it would be in production for at least another 5 years or something at this point, but it could be maybe another IP they've been working on for a while, or maybe one that they already have that they haven't used in a while. But I'm just wondering. Obviously, we have no idea what game it would be, or it could be a new IP, because they said exciting new IP, but we don't really know if that means like one that they've created, I guess, now, or maybe it's just some old one that they're going to remake to some extent. But it certainly has me confused, first off, as to what the future for Elder Scrolls Online is, but also they're getting involved in MMORPGs, and that's interesting to me, because I actually think that the Elder Scrolls world, especially like Daggerfall and Morrowind, are the best examples, especially Daggerfall. But they serve as really like good platforms, or like theoretical platforms for an MMO. I mean, they certainly could be that. And it makes me think about Elder Scrolls Online, which I wanted to talk about a little bit with you. And so Elder Scrolls Online right now is probably top 3 most popular MMO, maybe top 4 at the latest. It's certainly up there. I think last time I saw it had a couple million players. They do cross platform now, so it's probably even higher. I think I saw uniques was like 10 or 12 million, but uniques doesn't really mean anything. It just means that people created accounts or whatever. Point being, it's like, I would say it's a couple million, right? So they have a pretty good sized population. Not WoW numbers, but certainly up there. But Elder Scrolls Online, man, as an Elder Scrolls fan, it's just one of those games that I can't support. I just cannot support Elder Scrolls Online. And I think the biggest thing for me is that, first off, you were right in that when the ESO first came out, it was not doing well at all. In fact, it was getting destroyed based on its performance issues. It had terrible performance issues. I beta tested the game. I remember all of this. Bad performance issues. The combat was even worse than it is now, and it's still bad now, but it was even worse then. But what happens in a weird way, the way that they fixed it, so to say, and I say fix this almost like if you were to put a Band-Aid on a hole in a boat, right? Like you temporarily would stop it, but you're not really solving the issue. And that's whenever Tamriel and Unlimited came out. And that was kind of when they did the whole buy-to-play thing, and also did the whole factions are basically kind of useless now. You can play any race you want to, and you can join any faction. So we'll make factions useless, but you can play any race that you want now. So it's like, it ends up feeling like they got rid of any sense of identity or plot or narrative, instead to just be like, all right, now everyone can do everything. And that's kind of what my biggest problem with ESO is that it ends up feeling like, it just doesn't feel like an Elder Scrolls game. And what I mean by that is that when you look at the way the game plays, many of the NPCs and characters in the game don't have tasks. They don't have a job in the real world. There's no actual real worlds. And this is something that it's hard for me to stress to people because they don't understand. And you and I actually talked about this briefly. But let's talk about the concept of a virtual world, right? Like RPGs originally were created under the idea that we could have a world that existed divorced of our world, right? Like that the first writers or whatever else figured that out. That wait a minute, we don't have to just write literal things. We don't have to just go Ernest Hemingway style and just write really, depressing. Or Robert Frost and write really depressing poems about Earth and how you can die in the snow or whatever else. We can actually just write completely random stories about whatever, or take from old myths and lore, like mythology, like Lord of the Rings does, obviously. And that's of course one of the biggest IPs and helped pioneer the fantasy genre. But I just can't help but feel like as games have continued to evolve, all of these different types of genres have evolved. The MMO genre has evolved at a very snail pace, and there's a reason for that. What you were saying earlier applies tenfold. A lot more cost reasons, right? They're cost prohibited in a lot of ways. They can't you can't launch an MMO, especially these AAA companies, and do lukewarm. It's just like it's basically a death sentence for the game, because when you're spending $100 to $200 million on your game, you can't not have subscriptions if that's going to be the model that you're going to work with or whatever else. So with Elder Scrolls, they had to kind of do the Tamriel Unlimited, obviously, to fix the game. But here's the weird thing, and it's kind of like I've been discovering this as I've been doing my Dark Age of Camelot video. But did you know that Matt Ferror, I think is how you pronounce it, he's actually one of the original founders of Mythic and producers / developers behind Dark Age of Camelot. That's the guy who runs ZeniMax Online Studios, which is just like, it's so weird to think about that you basically have the guy who helped create Dark Age of Camelot, which, in many ways pioneered PvP, but also pioneered Realm versus Realm. And Realm is so like inconsequential in ESO. That's the sad thing to me. And they chose to build their game that way. It's not like they could have made it racial, right? They could have made it about red guards and orcs and Imperials or whatever else, and maybe they have their own factions amongst each other. That would obviously heavily limit players, because you'd only have Imperials playing with Imperials and whatever else. And by the way, people in ESO hate Imperials because it was a class or a race that they unlocked after the fact that is basically like the best race to play in PvP. But anyway, so I understand why they did faction systems, and the faction systems that they created made sense, right? I think, let me look up how they used to do it, because I think it was like people who lived in the marsh area worked together. So it was like, okay, here it is. The Aldmeri Dominion was Altmer, Bosmer, and Khajiit. I could see that to some extent, like Khajiit and Bosmer. I could see that to some extent. Altmer, yeah, I could see it. Ebonheart Pact was the Nord, Dunmer, and Argonians. That one was kind of strange, obviously, because the Nords and Dunmer and Argonians have been fighting amongst each other for such a long time.
Yeah,
but I guess maybe that's what they were going for. It's like you're a pact because of force or something. And then they did the Daggerfall Covenant, which was Breton, Redguard, and the Orcs, or Orsimer, or whatever. I don't have a problem with any of the Daggerfall ones, but then they just basically were like, all right, the factions don't really actually mean that much. You can play whatever race you want. You can play with whatever faction that you want to. None of that actually matters. So, and then it like just begs a question for me. If you have the guy that basically helped create Realm, and by the way, one of the best things that Dark Age of Camelot did was make realms very specific. There wasn't any mirror classes, which meant that every class on every faction was unique. So you might have similar roles, like a tank and a tank, but they weren't the same class, and they weren't mirrored at all. So it wasn't just like renamed skins and different art. It was an actual different class. And so there was realm pride, right? Like people like to say, I like this, I like Hyborian, or I like Midgard or whoever else because of this reason, because of this class or this kind of play style. And I feel like with Elder Scrolls Online, one of my biggest issues with it is that when you compare it to other Elder Scrolls titles, it falls short in terms of its world, which that seems problematic to me, because it's a massive multiplayer online game. It should theoretically have the best world. Like, I mean, wouldn't you agree to some extent that you would expect that the MMO version of an Elder Scrolls game would probably have the best world overall?
I mean, they're definitely the best scope, because I mean, we haven't had an Elder Scrolls game since Arena that actually spanned more than like one or two nations, really. I mean, Daggerfall spanned I think parts of three nations, but I mean most of them, since I mean Morrowind was set in like half of Morrowind, Skyrim is set in Skyrim, Oblivion was set in Cyrodiil, But you think it'd be amazing for the lore and the scope, at least, to have the entirety of Tamriel for the most part available for you to travel and to explore and stuff like that. And for that part, it is pretty cool. I mean, I'm not going to say I've played like hundreds of hours of it. I'm not like an expert on ESO, but I did jump around a lot to kind of see, what they did with Morrowind, what they did with Daggerfall, what they did with, uh, Hammerfell and stuff like that. Or I think the one I jumped to was the small island that they did. I totally forgot what the name of it is, but the one that Elder Scrolls Adventures Redguard is set in. Uh, Strosmakai. Strosmakai is the place. Yeah. Um, and it's cool what they did. I mean, they definitely tried to give each area its own feel, architecture, and stuff like that. It's different from the original games, but they
Right.
try to give it that sort of feel. But I couldn't get over how synthetic it all felt.
Yeah.
That's the problem with a lot of MMOs. I think is that,
100%.
especially when even coming from Skyrim, you could go in there and it's like you steal from somebody, people get pissed off, they attack you or whatever. Or if you know, you there's a body lying around, a guard sees it like, my God, who did this? It's like, you there, you violated the law, or whatever they say, I was so happy because it proved my point so well when I was in, I believe the High Elf area, Valen. Yeah, I think Valenwood, I guess, or no, it was
I think it is Valenwood.
it was either in Valenwood or the Isles. I'm not sure which one. It was a while ago, but I was in one of the cities and I saw this one player sneaking around. I'm like, ooh, I'm gonna get to see some cool assassin stuff, right? And they were going around and like pickpocketing people, and I even killed one of them. And I literally in my Elder Scrolls documentary, I have footage of this like priest or somebody like walking over the corpse of one of one of their comrades
I think I saw
and
that.
not even noticing. And I'm like, okay. Like and I know AI constraints and stuff like that are different when you have thousands upon thousands of people and super servers and stuff. I could never really feel like I was playing a game. Really, it was always like it felt it didn't really feel like a simulation. It felt more just like, okay, these characters will respond to these stimuli, and I was overthinking things, and I was just like trying to figure out logic rather than trying to enjoy the game.
Yeah.
And like it didn't seem like, how cool would it be if you could actually have this town hate you for the rest of your playthrough,
Right.
or whatever. Like I remember even this is how slow the genre has evolved in EverQuest. The original EverQuest, I remember having distinct faction and racial lines. Like
Yep.
one time I played
Languages as well.
yeah, languages. One time I'd usually always play like a half elf or whatever, or whatever the equivalent was. I think there was half elves in that game, wasn't there?
Yeah.
But one time I played a dark elf and it was really dark. I had dark vision or whatever, but I played a dark elf on a PvP server. And at a pretty low level, I made my way all the way from the Dark Elf City and snuck through, avoiding not only really tough monsters, and back then you dropped all your equipment when you died, but also other players who could kill you. And I stuck all the way, I believe, to Freeport, if I remember right.
Yep. That's the human
And
city.
yeah, and the way that worked is that if you were to go into like the higher class area of Freeport, guards would attack
You
you
were a
on
kill on
sight.
sight. Yeah.
Yeah. So the only place I could be, I had to literally sneak through the slums and avoid guards. And that's so cool that you
Yep.
could actually role play like that. I remember sneaking into the slums and fighting people in the arena and stuff like that. But I had to be careful because if I went into too much of a public place, guards would be on top of me, and I wasn't that high level, so they'd probably take me out. So
Right.
that sort of interaction, like how could a game? What was EverQuest, like 99 or
Yeah.
2000 or something?
99. And when they made it, I think they only had been working on it for a couple of years too. Not even 5, 6 years.
Yeah, when some game like from 99 does it better than a game from 2014, it's you got to question like what are you guys doing? Like, it looks great, it looks pretty, it has a lot of interesting environments, but if the gameplay like is that much more sterilized and your choices, even your faction choices don't even matter, like what it doesn't really make a lot of sense. Like I was able to travel all around ESO and nobody would attack me.
Yes.
So I don't it's really odd that they made that change.
Well, that's the thing is, like, I've seen a couple comments in chat, and it's not to pick on anybody in particular. I've seen this rhetoric mentioned a lot, and it's kind of like, well, you guys are just expecting it to be like old games. It's like, no, we're expecting it to be better than all. That's what you expect when things like progress and time. Time is supposed to, in some ways, lead to the innovation of other things and other genres, or maybe even subgenres or whatever else. But I made the joke to you in a private message that when the adventure game genre seems like it's like doing a lot more than the MMO genre is, that's when you know, like, here's a genre at one point that was considered basically dead, and everybody was saying that it was a dead genre, and now it's had in many ways a resurgence, especially because of all these visual novels and visual games that are out now, and indie games that I got to play at a couple conventions. It's a very much alive genre, and it certainly seems like it's come a long way. But then, like, in regards to what you said, what I implore people to do who think that this is just a pedantic argument, or think that this is just a old things are better than new things argument, is go into Elder Scrolls Online and just take it seriously. Like, I mean, like, by its lore, within its own lore, within its own universe. Try and take it seriously. What you'll find is you can't. And that's the problem, is that a virtual world, a world that's within a mythos or an IP, is supposed to be believable within its own rule set, right? That's what the basic concept of an RPG world is, right? It has its own rule set. It's supposed to be believable. Maybe if it's like D&D or whatever, it has to adhere to certain rules. This is what, death touch means. This is what this role means, or whatever else. Whatever rule set it has to adhere to, it has to make sense. Elder Scrolls doesn't make sense because there's so much lore that says that. Whenever I was playing a dark elf and I spawned in the Altmer city or whatever, I'm thinking to myself, like, how impossible would this be in lore? Like, they would just let me run around and just have a good... Like, it would not happen. They would not let me do that. I mean, these are a group of people who are literally, like, religiously created to hate each other. Like, they're not going to like each other. And they've been warring amongst each other for such a long time. Not to mention Altmer, despite their holier than thou appearance, are pretty terrible as well. Like, they're just as bad, and if not worse, than Dunmer in many ways in regards to what they'll do with the whole. Is it the Thalnos or whatever, who are basically like trying to conquer everything?
Yeah, or the Thalmer.
Thalmer. Is it Thalmir?
Yeah.
Like the faction that's like the High Elf faction that's been basically trying to take over Cyrodiil for such a long time, but they had that truce or whatever else, I think. And that, I think that also is the plot in Skyrim, is they still have the truce at that time. But there's a couple quest lines you can play in which you have to fight against them. I do remember that. But point being is, like, it falls apart once you start to actually take it seriously in some way or shape or form. And that, to me, that's why I think it's a perfect segue to talk about Elder Scrolls and go into Elder Scrolls Online, but also talk about the systemic problem of MMO worlds losing their, like, worldliness, so to say. And I think this actually, people will try and ignore this and think that it's not a big issue and think this is just old people, this is just old hat kind of problems. Well, look at the most recent WoW expansion. It's had immense amounts of issues because its world at this point is a bastardization of what it used to be. And it's that, how can you really have conflict between the Horde and Alliance when you've constantly implemented things that have gotten rid of that conflict? When you've made it to where you can fly, you can take portals everywhere, it's harder to encounter people on the road, right? Like, that was the coolest thing about Morrowind, is that there were certain engagements that were scripted because you had to walk early on in the game. Like, everyone remembers the was he a what was he? He's a wood elf, the wood elf guy who has the scroll and the boots or whatever, and he just comes flying down and dies, and you look at his scroll and you're like, huh? And you activate it. Everyone activated it. I don't know about you, but I activated it the first time. Just to be like, I wonder what this is, and you jump, and then you just go flying through the air, but then you realize, wait a minute, I can actually use this if I levitate right before I hit the ground. That's what I used to always do, is like, you'd hit levitate spell right before you would hit the ground so you wouldn't take any damage. And you could use it as a means of traveling. But anyway, that's a totally random point. But the world itself in Elder Scrolls Online, that's where the majority of my issue is. But to bring it back to what I was saying about WoW is encountering that as well. People are like, well, people don't want to do war mode, or, the conflict doesn't seem to really happen that often unless you go to these certain areas. Well, it's like, well, it's not like once once the lore starts to fall apart and the world starts to fall apart, you no longer have reasons for conflict anymore. And that's my issue with ESO, is that when the dark elves no longer hate the high elves, or the high elves don't hate them as well, you don't have that like conflict. You don't have that tribalism that's supposed to exist, especially supposed to exist in this type of universe that you're trying to portray as like fantasy like or whatever else. And when that starts to be missing in your game, it's just really hard to feel like you're immersed in any way, shape, or form. Not to mention what you said about, funny enough, that story that you told me about EverQuest is the same exact type of story that my best friend tells me all the time about EverQuest. He played a dark elf. He lived in Freeport and also lived in the I think it was like caves or something like that. He said that there was some part of the underground that you could also live in or whatever else. Oh. And that he could still do quests and still do things, but he had to obviously be careful that somebody wouldn't call the guards or the guards wouldn't come attack him, because he was still KOS, especially on a PvP server. He could be killed by another player.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so there was like real risk, right? You're on the edge of your seat thinking like, I'm this dark elf trying to live in this city for whatever reason, right? But I'm just here and I'm living here. And there was quests, for example, where I remember, I mentioned this in my EverQuest video, but there's this Muffin for Pandos quest, where you have to give this guy a muffin. And when you give him a muffin, he leaves his guard post. And when he leaves his guard post, you get to go inside and talk to Lady Shay, who's like this like lady, who had some affair with some other guy that you learn in another quest line, but it's all connected together because it's one giant quest line. Point being, these characters have like simulated lives, right? Like they're doing things. Like this Lady Shay is some lady of a lord who's having an affair, and you can talk to her about it. If you get her drunk enough, she'll actually tell you who the person is, and then you can go track down that guy and do like a quest with him. There's so many layers to it. Meanwhile, in an MMO in this current day and age, it's like you get one leveling zone per faction, even though there's like 4 races, right? And by the way, ESO is a bad example in that case. They actually give you a lot of different places to level because of the way the game works. You can level any content in that game. Like, I don't know if you knew that. That's what Tamriel Unlimited did as well. It made it to where areas aren't level gated. So you can go anywhere and do any type of content. You'll be bumped up to whatever level you need to, which, by the way, I think makes total sense from a ease of access perspective, but totally murders your world in any way, shape, or form. Like it ruins your world, because you shouldn't be able to go into the cave with the fucking hunger or whatever else, right? Like I still remember playing Morrowind recently when I went into a cave and I tried to steal from this ancestor crypt, and there's a hunger there, and the hungers are weak to silver weapons, but at the time I didn't have one, so I literally couldn't kill this guy, but I managed to just run around him, grab the loot, and then get out and close the door on him, and he couldn't get out because mobs couldn't open doors in that game, which is like their biggest weakness. If you could just lock them behind a door, they were screwed. But
yeah,
that's that kind of experience. The fear of being like, I don't know if I could take this kind of fight or whatever else. Like this has me on the edge of my seat. To go from having that in an EQ1 experience now almost 20 years ago to not being able to have that repeated in a current day experience, there has to be something like wrong there. Like there is a larger issue at play here, and I think BFA to me just really proves that. And that's you cannot create an MMO world that doesn't follow its own rules and lore. Like you just can't do it, because in the end, people will play it and it'll be commercially successful, right? Because maybe most people don't care about that. But I think that it actually ends up hurting everything. Like, you've heard of EVE Online?
Yeah, I know a lot about EVE Online. I've never played it, but I know enough about it that I'll never ever play it. But it seems like an amazing thing if you invest that much time into it. Yeah.
And if it's your type of game and you enjoy the type of gameplay within the game, which is not really my style of game, but what I love about EVE Online is that the entire game is built around the economy, and that's because it has to be. Like, the whole game has to be built around the economy if PvP is the main thing that you're doing, because the only thing that'll stop you from attacking somebody is your ROI, right? Like, are you going to make a return on your investment, or are you going to lose the amount of money that you put into your ship or your parts or whatever else? So it comes down to, like, I can try and kill this guy, but is it really worth it? And so that's what will keep players from just endlessly killing each other all the time, obviously, is economic reasons, which sounds funny to think about, but I mean, it's true, especially even in the real world. Like, economic reasons prohibit us from trying to kill everybody in some way, shape, or form. But within a world, if there's no consequence period, there's basically nothing that stops anybody from doing anything. And people have started to complain about that. And it's funny to see the recent hoopla about WoW and BFA and how it's the worst expansion thus far, because you're thinking to yourself, like, they don't even understand that this is a systemic issue. They're not going to fix it by just doing another expansion. And so that's what I'm starting to wonder at this current place. And to build a little bit of the premise before because I don't want to get too much into any, I think we'll just leave it on ESO and topics of MMOs for today, because we've already gone for about 2.5 hours now. But I wanted to talk about, in regards to what I was mentioning with virtual worlds. Currently, right now, we've obviously seen that they've kind of been impacted negatively in many ways and haven't really advanced as a MMORPG genre. But we've seen RPGs advance, right? We've seen, like, I love to look at Pathfinder because it's a simulated tabletop experience. Like, that's what they've tried to do. They've tried to make it a tabletop experience in an RPG that you can play. And many people will say, oh, who cares about tabletop? Who cares about RPGs? Well, that's what I kind of wanted to build with my premise, and I've talked about this with you personally. And that's that many people forget that the first type of MMO was a MUD, right? Which is a text-based game, multi-user dungeon. But before that, all we had was pen and paper, right? I mean, that's what our RPGs were. It was what you wrote. It's what, obviously, you know, people created, whoever did, created the Dungeons and Dragons mythos or world, which has tons of different lore books and tons of different ways to play the game, but mainly it's going to operate under either like 3.5 rule set or whatever the current rule set is. Those are like the most popular rule sets, so it's uniform to some extent. But point being is that many stories that were started at first were just created by you or me, just regular players, and that's basically what the whole premise of the game is, right? Like when you watch Critical Role, they have a DM, but the players are just, they're doing that on the fly. They're interacting with the DM on the fly, and people love watching Critical Role, obviously, because of the voice actors, but it's also just very interactive and fun to be able to be part of it, and I guess like an adventure party, and have a unique role that can specifically help you in regards to how, but people are getting away from that, right? Because now we're not having specific roles anymore. Now everybody can do everything. And what I guess I'm trying to say, and the big point that I want to make, is that I think in many ways, the reason why the MMORPG genre right now feels so dry and feels so lifeless is because we've gotten away from what used to be our tabletop roots. And that's that we need to create a world which makes sense, right? We need to create a world in which every class and every type of archetype has a use. We need to make a world that exists within its own system. Like as a player in a D&D campaign, your DM is constantly creating new threats for you. Obviously, that's not one-to-one to an MMORPG. Yeah, developers can make content for you, but anyway, my point being is I have a huge rant on that topic that I'll go over some other time, but developer-made content is not really sustainable. I don't think it is. Like, I think there's too many examples of developer-made content not being sustainable. And WoW is basically the only MMO at this point who's been making content for as long as they have been at the level that they've been making it and been successful. And so everyone then thinks, oh, theme park games are the way to go. And it's like, well, not really, because if WoW can sometimes fail when they do BFA or another expansion, do you think like another game could afford to fail in that same way that WoW is suffering right now? No, it would be the death of their company, let alone their game. And so, yes, like the higher stakes or whatever else is certainly a problem. But I can't help but feel like at the end of the day, we would solve many of our issues if we could just remember what the original vision of an MMO is. And I like to talk about Brad McQuaid and Richard Garriott and Raf Koster, the original devs for the original MMOs, Ultima Online, Star Wars Galaxies, even Mark Jacobs, Dark Age of Camelot, EverQuest. And their visions were very simple. They were take that tabletop, personal RPG experience and put it online, right? That was like the initial idea was like, make this experience online. But Brad would even go further on to say later on that he thought, and I think the same way, so that's why I like to talk about Brad's view on this in particular, is that he sees it as, this is just the beginning. We don't even have holodecks yet. We don't even have real virtual reality yet. Now imagine if that becomes part of things, then tabletop it's not just tabletop anymore. Now it evolves into, well, you can do tabletop, but you can actually be exactly who you want to be in the exact world that you want to be, playing the exact character that you want to play. That experience doesn't currently exist besides tabletop, right? Like you can't actually do any of that. But I wonder, could that be the future to some extent, getting back to those roots? Because I find that many developers have made this case. I mean, I saw Smedley, who worked on SOE back in the day and was behind EverQuest and whatever else, and now he works at Amazon Game Studios, I believe, as the head of their division. But Smedley made a good point, and he said that it's not sustainable for developers to make constant developer-made content. Ultimately, emergent gameplay is what's going to push the market forward, which, I mean, I think any of us can agree at this point. The most sustainable way to make a game is to make it to where you can kill each other. And to provide an example of this, the game that Dark Age of Camelot was built on, or based after, Spellbinder, this game called Spellbinder The Nexus, I believe, it was like an arena game where you just PvP'd each other, but there was actual factions, 3 different factions, and you would PvP amongst these factions. Well, that system, ended up becoming Dark Age of Camelot, and obviously Dark Age of Camelot is a far more evolved form of that system. But it's funny to think that Elder Scrolls Online, which has the same creator of that, now can't even get their faction system working properly. At the end of the day, MMOs, for some reason or another, aren't advancing in the way that they should be or shouldn't be, or maybe are advancing in the way that they shouldn't be. Do you think, and I know MMOs aren't necessarily where your expertise lies, but do you think that maybe in some ways, if we can return to an idea of a game such as Daggerfall as a world, if we could do that in an MMO, would you think that would then, I guess, determine or define what the genre would be from that, or the genre would be from that point on? I feel like it's hard to say it wouldn't be, right? It would completely change things if someone could do it right.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically my ideal RPG. I mean, it's interesting. I spoke with Julian Jensen, who was the project lead of the Elder Scrolls. He would basically, people call him the father of the Elder Scrolls, and his original idea from Daggerfall on was to design it as eventually as an MMO, where any one of those, say, 750,000 NPCs could be a person. So you could just like do whatever role or whatever adventure you want in this world, and that would be like a literally like living, breathing world. And it probably would have been a bit different from what Daggerfall did, and obviously as technology and interface and stuff improves, it'd be better. But uh I think coming at it from a point of, let's make a living world rather than what is successful in current MMOs are like, we're kind of thinking like how to make an immersive living, breathing world with a lot of players.
Right.
Is a kind of our standpoint. Somebody like, Matt Fuhrer, who I almost put in my script. I cut it last second, but I almost mentioned him in my script with about Elder Scrolls. But he was hired on, and they were like, okay, let's make a competitor to WoW. It's set in the Elder Scrolls universe. They're thinking, let's make a game that's kind of successful, and slap Elder Scrolls on top, like
100%.
That kind of viewpoint, especially with somebody who came off, not the most successful game. I think it didn't Dark Age kind of, well, it was canceled or given to somebody else at the end, I think. Or
I'm about to tell the story, so I'll have a video out on it. But basically, at the end of the day, it had a moderate level of success, but it was kind of like precursory. They were never able to maintain the level of success they had for longer than 2 to 3 years.
So he wasn't able to bring the clout of proven success behind him. If they brought, the lead designer of WoW over or whatever, they'd be telling Bethesda what they're going to do. They'd be telling ZeniMax what they're going to do. But Matt Fuhrer said he qualified for the job, but he didn't really necessarily have the clout of a fantastically successful MMO under his belt. So
okay, so that's his excuse. No, I'm just kidding.
That's my intuition. I don't know if that's true or not.
Yeah, I'm just messing.
But so they just emulated. I mean, at this point, Bethesda's been just trying to become Blizzard for about 10 years now. That's what they've been doing. Blizzard has somehow maintained 10 plus years of subscription-based MMO, unheard of, never been done before or since. To that level, obviously, millions of subscribers. Everybody would love that. That's the perfect business model. people guaranteed to give you money every month. I mean, look how extraordinarily successful Netflix has become, where they have millions and millions of subscribers, guaranteed money every month,
Right.
with or without, delivering a product. But I agree with you. The idea that you just, I mean, in a way, like, it's amazing that people complain about how they've kind of dumbed down WoW, because WoW was
It was a
ever,
dumbing down.
yeah, WoW was EverQuest without the consequences. You know, they did a great job with it. Had a good aesthetic.
Early on, I'd argue it wasn't completely the other direction yet, but it certainly
No,
became that after the first 3 expansions.
yeah, yeah, and I have not played WoW, but from everything I've read, like, they, and I've heard a lot of stories from it, like, when you died, you became a ghost, you go back and get your corpse, stuff like that. Not so in EverQuest. You could lose your stuff forever in EverQuest
Yep.
easily. There were definite. I mean, if you go back as far as, like, we're talking about multi-user dungeons, the biggest multi-user dungeon, I believe, was Major Mud, which, not only did you drop all of your items to the ground when you died, like, for anybody to pick up, you had lives. If you died like 7 times in a row, you would be re-rolled. You had to start over again. Like, as the online RPG has evolved, it's gotten less and less about consequences, less and less about immersion, less and less about, and maybe that's why the audiences continue to grow, because your average WoW player isn't your hardcore tabletop D&D nerd who wants to have a fully immersive, hardcore experience. Probably not. When you get up to 10 million players or whatever, you're going to be getting a lot of more casual audience who just wants to hang out with their friends, do a couple missions, level up and then go and then log off. But I agree with you that at its heart, I think going back to not necessarily the core mechanics, we don't need to have dice rolls. We don't need to have character sheets. We don't need to have the exact, items of a tabletop game, but the heart has been lost. I think the actual intent and the actual
Yes.
soul of RPGs started in D&D, and, was actually the original role-playing game was LARPing, basically.
Yeah.
I read about this count who had, like, this maze, and he had a bunch of rich people come over, and they'd role play in his, like, huge mansion or whatever. Like,
Murder mystery
it
is the same thing. Like, you ever heard of a murder mystery dinner? Like, this has
yeah,
been a concept for like 100 something years or whatever. Where
yeah,
like LARPing was,
actually,
yeah. Well, actually, that's a good point. Centuries, but yeah, that's what roleplay was. It, like you said, it was LARPing, and now it's like we have obviously D&D, and it's been around for like 40, 50, 60 years at this point. And then we've progressed into MUDs and graphical MUDs and MMOs and 3D MMOs, and now we find ourselves in this position where WoW has been around for 14 years now, and the recent stats that I saw detailing their US subscriptions, I think they said that they were down 25% since the expansion came out, because it hasn't been doing particularly well. And frankly, I don't know how much longevity there is left in that game. I really don't think it's a game that at this point can last forever. I mean, I'm sure in some small sense or whatever else, but I mean in a large sense. And I think although we can look at WoW and certainly criticize it, the burden is not on WoW to innovate. They're doing just fine doing what they're doing, and they've been doing it for a long time. It's only more recently they've started to have, I guess, less success because of a bad expansion that they put out. But I mean, really, at the end of the day, if they put out another Legion-esque expansion, the previous expansion before that, that's good, their fan base is probably going to eat it up just the same. But there certainly is a huge burden on other developers to try and create an experience that's going to capture what people want. And I guess what I bring up this premise in some way, like with tongue in cheek, because some people seem to think that if you hate WoW or you hate popular things or things that are commercially successful, it automatically puts you on the perspective of like a fringe artist, when it's like, not necessarily. Like, I might not just want niche product or just want a niche product. I just want what I believe in, what you have said based on your knowledge of talking to people, which is, by the way, the same type of things that I've gotten from different people like Richard Garriott and Mark Jacobs, which is that we want MMOs to return to being what they were originally supposed to be, which is this, interactive tabletop, open world experience that they haven't been. And I wonder if, as WoW starts to kind of slow down, we know Blizzard's working on another IP. They are always working on another IP. We have no idea what it is, and it could be Diablo the phone or version or whatever else. At this point, we have no clue. They purposely do that. They announce something and then they don't tell you what it is, so everyone gets excited, and then we find out it's a Diablo on the Switch game, for example. Like, that was a big one. People were laughing, like, no one asked for this or whatever else. But I guess looking forward at the market in terms of Kickstarter games, have you heard or seen any of these Kickstarter games that are currently out there or supposedly supposed to release in the next couple of years?
I
Chronicles of Valeria, Star Citizen, Camelot Unchained. I don't know if any of these ring a bell.
I keep minor interests in there. I probably know the most about Star Citizen. Somebody recommended that Chronicles of Valeria looks really promising. I read about it. It seems like it's kind of going more toward the player driven, emergent gameplay, more real world kind of stuff, immersive world kind of stuff. I have no idea how it'll turn out, but it does something. That's probably, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I think that the most innovation in role playing games, whether online or offline, will come from this new emerging kind of middle market. Because the problem has been that
they haven't been accessible. Like, I think if I'm following the line of reasoning that you're saying, that's certainly been a big issue. And I agree with you. Just to say, I'm not a purist, and I don't know if you're a purist, but I know some people are very puristic about that. Like, in some ways, they're like, it has to be this kind of experience and hardcore, and it needs to be EQ1. And I think that's the reasoning that you're kind of going along with here.
Well, it's also like budget. I think innovation. I think budgets outgrew its innovation. Like, I think budgets outgrew innovation in a whole. Like, in the 90s and early 2000s, there was this happy medium where you could throw $20 million or maybe $5-10 million at a game and try something very new, and get potentially a really good game out of it. We saw games like Deus Ex, we saw Morrowind, things like that. Those didn't cost $100 million to make. Now you make a game, it can cost $50-100 million to make, so it has to be successful,
right?
Like, massively successful. Famously, a few years ago, the Tomb Raider reboot got 4 million copies sold. Any other game for the last 20 years, that would be a knockout success. Square Enix was disappointed by those sales. Like, that's the level of guaranteed success these kind of companies need. And I think that if you're looking at that success, you can only base your decisions off of what has already been successful.
Yeah.
And that literally equals no innovation. That equals, this worked, let's do this. This worked, let's do this.
Right.
Like, you can't try anything new. So with that in mind, I think that we've seen some games that look like AAA games, but have like a tenth of the budget. Games like
Kingdom Come Deliverance was definitely that.
Kingdom Come Deliverance, exactly. Hellblade, Soul Sacrifice, or
it's Hellblade
Senua's Sacrifice.
Senua, yeah. There you go.
And other games like even the Pathfinder Kingmaker, games that look like, look almost as good as a $50 million game, but were made for a fraction of the budget, so they can afford to not sell 10 million copies,
right?
And still be successful. I mean, Divinity: Ritual of Sin, that's a great success story, as well as a sequel. Like, it plays like a really solid, professionally made game, but can try new things, like,
right,
cooperative dialogue sequences. That's such a weird idea, but it works. It's awesome. It really helps explain why your characters are in this world and why they acknowledge that they each other exist and stuff like that. So I think that middle market, there's indie games, there's like what I need to make a video about it. I'm going to call them AA games.
Right.
Because we don't say A games, or we only say AAA games. I think I'm going to call it like AA games or something like that, right?
Well, it's funny you say that. I wanted to do a panel at some point where I got a bunch of people on where we can talk about the topic or the terms such as AAA, AA, indie, and define them, because I feel like they haven't been defined really well in such a long time, because the terms have obviously changed so much and the market's shifted in many ways, where it's like now you hear people saying indie company, and indie company means like $5 million.
Yeah, it's really odd because, like, for example, Star Citizen, that game has raised $160 million. Do you know? Did you know that that's literally the budget of all 4 Mass Effect production budgets combined?
Doesn't
Like,
surprise me.
yeah, but that's technically an indie game. They're independent, so
Right.
like, yeah, what are we talking about? Yeah, that's a really good thing. I should do a video eventually on that. But yeah, so I think that, you know, decently funded, but not trying to, not doing ads with, like, ridiculous celebrity cameos, like marketing budgets are up to like 40 to 50, $60 million on some of these games, sometimes more. Like Destiny and Call of Duty, they have ridiculously large budgets. If you can promote the game through word of mouth and through, platforms and reviews and stuff like that, that automatically cuts your budget in half. If you can not try to make a game that looks I mean, surprisingly, Kingdom Come looks amazing, but if you can, you don't necessarily have to do that level of presentation if you make the game attractive with attractive aesthetic. We see plenty of indie games that look nice, but you can tell that they didn't spend 6 months developing,
Right.
this area.
Yeah.
They cut corners, they made things simple but attractive looking. Even WoW isn't that amazing looking. It's has a nice aesthetic. But I think that's probably where we're going to see the most innovation, because indie games are too small of a budget to really do anything of a crazy scope or crazy level of production, and AAA games are too risky to try something too new. So I think that games in the middle will probably be the future for what we're talking about, because they'll be able to make decent looking games that attract a wide enough audience due to presentation, but will also be able to risk, not selling 10 million copies. They can actually try new things. They can stumble, they can fail, and they don't have, $1 million investors to answer to,
Yeah, I
So
think that
I think
that speaks to the resurgence of the Kickstarter, like, when I say resurgence, I mean more so of the indie developer, but like the, I guess, arrival of Kickstarter and these different platforms like Indiegogo, where you can have developers. I mean, if I remember correctly, Project Gorgon, which is an MMO that is in early access right now, but it was only kickstarted for like 100K or something like that. And it basically is trying to be like EQ1 to some extent, maybe more like Asheron's Call. And it does a decent job at doing that. For 100K is certainly impressive. But obviously now we have big players like Camelot Unchained, which is Mark Jacobs' company, who I think at this point they have kickstarted like 7 to 10 million, and then they also have an investor, a previous investor, that gave them another 10. So they're up to like 20 million or so, and currently in closed beta. So it's a real thing at this point. It's becoming a real thing. And what I think is really interesting is, when have we ever seen this where we're seeing old school developers come back with new ideas and new takes on the old, maybe bit of genre that they kind of helped pioneer? Like, we're seeing that with Mark Jacobs, Brad McQuaid's coming back with his Pantheon game. I mean, you could say to some extent, Star Citizen, was like originally built on the idea of what do they used to call it? It's not Homeworld. What's the name of that game that Freelancer? I think he wanted to do like the
yeah, it's
MMO
like
freelancer experience.
Yeah, I mean, and that's Chris Roberts. He did the classic Wing Commander series, which was, late 80s or early 90s, popular, some of the most expensive games actually at the time, because they had like Mark Hamill and, like, Hollywood actors and stuff like that. But yeah, it is amazing when the old guys have to come back. And I have a whole cluster of thoughts about Star Citizen as a project, but some of these are pretty amazing. How they've turned out, and yeah, it's amazing when the old guys have to come back and crowdfund by the actual players to make a good game. Like, it's but that's the thing. I think that, unfortunately, like, as much as we talk about mass success and how this could be great ideas, unfortunately, it seems more and more that we have become a niche that isn't as profitable as the mainstream. People who want actual sensical lore, worlds that, in ESO you can literally trot into Morrowind as an Altmer trot into Morrowind on a flaming horse and summon a Daedra in front of everybody and nobody cares. You
Mhm.
know, that's literally something you can do. I think we have unfortunately kind of become a niche industry, and most companies and most investors see the numbers of mobile games, of mainstream MMOs, and of, you know, action, dumbed down action RPGs, and say that's where we need to make our money. And I think you could bridge the two. The two. You could make a game that could bridge multiple um, demographics, but I don't think people really want to risk trying that. So
Yeah, and I
I
think
think,
that's it's funny you say that the old developers are getting supported by the community, because in a way what that tells me is that there is a demand there. Like there's
mhm,
many different Kickstarter MMOs out there right now that have multi-million-dollar budgets. So that alone should tell people that the market is wanting something new. They want something new and unique. But what AAA company is going to take that risk first?
no,
Like none of them are at this point, unless it's someone with like you said about Matt, someone with a lot of clout. Like if they have a lot of like energy and hoopla behind them, maybe they have the name and the ability to say it's going to be this way or the highway. But I mean, really, as the age of publishers has kind of, I think the age of publishers is slowly starting to come to an end. I mean, we used to see developers serve as like almost independent contractors. I mean, that's what Black Owl Studios was. That's what Troika was, right?
yeah,
Like these old school RPG companies were basically like for hire. They'd make, you know, Telltale as well. Like we'll make whatever RPG you want in the universe that you want us to make it in, if you give us the money. Well, nowadays, especially Obsidian is learning that they learned with Tyranny, which wasn't a bad game, is a moderate level of success. But what they learned about that, and I've heard this from, I think it was Josh Sawyer said this, but that even if it was really good, it would have had to have been a major success because they funded that one on their own compared
yeah,
to. They went to Paradox to get funding for that game versus funding it on their own. So what they found is that when they did Pillars of Eternity 1 as a Kickstarter project, I mean, it had obviously it's probably kind of hard to recapture that level of success because that was a major successful title. People were saying CRPGs are back. That's how successful Pillars of Eternity 1 was.
yeah, it was a spur of the moment thing. Like you can't recreate that hype again.
Right, and
It's
they
already
tried.
happened,
Like
yeah.
Pillars of Eternity 2, by most measures, for me, in my opinion, is a better game than the first one is, but has none of the same hoopla. And in fact, we've heard rumors that Obsidian is about to get bought out by Microsoft. So,
Yeah,
we're like even that level of success for an RPG, we're learning like it's not even enough. Like so, to finish the point that I was making earlier, I think the age of publisher is coming to an end as the rise of Kickstarter starts to happen. Especially, we've had very successful Kickstarter projects or kickstarted projects, such as the biggest one that everyone will probably mention is Shovel Knight. That was like a huge success and helped kind of really like reimagine what platformers could be or are to some extent, especially 8-bit. I mean, because who could think an 8-bit game would work in 2018 or 2017? Like it certainly worked. But it's a bit sad when you think about it, isn't it? To think that the fate of the genre in the future right now is resting on a bunch of people who have basically no rules or regulations surrounding them. And what I mean is like Kickstarter projects, like what security is there really around any of that? I mean, that's obviously what all of the scare, I guess the scary narrative surrounding Star Citizen is what if they don't? Like, what happens to the money? Like, can we? They change the terms of service. Does that mean we can't get our money back, or like? So it's scary to think about, but it's also exciting in a way because you have people like Brad McQuaid, who's essentially trying to remake EverQuest with Pantheon.
right.
I'm not really convinced that game can work, and I know that some people will be angry at me for saying that because I'm typically the more so
Betrayal.
I'm more so on the side of the sandbox, but I think in this case, I don't know if that group cooperative experience is really going to work in the same way it used to, like that dungeon crawler kind of experience. But point being is, it's still cool to see that we have Brad McQuaid coming back with the game and basically trying to be like, I think I can do this again. and we don't know if he can. And Mark Jacobs thinks the same thing with Camelot Unchained. It's basically like, here's everything that we wanted to do with Dark Age of Camelot that we couldn't do, aka create like actual structures and create an actual settlement ourselves. Which the way when I look at Camelot Unchained, to end on this note, I think Camelot Unchained is a really good view of what could happen in the future, because it's a very professional company done by a very professional developer, but also a very professional team. But it's kickstarted. They've been relatively good in following up on their promises. I think they're saying that they're shooting for a launch next year because of the investors that came in. They found out that they needed that extra 10 million or whatever else at this point to ramp up. I think they even have another studio. They have 2 studios currently. But point being is that game is completely centered around player-made content. It's players create their civilization within their faction. I think every civilization has a major city that can't be destroyed, but everything else can be. And everything else is about getting resources. So like that archetype of a game seems like it could be successful. So like when I look at Camelot Unchained, I see if that game can work, then maybe that means that the genre or something can evolve or shift back to more, player-made content. But at the end of the day, it's all speculation and we don't know. And that's kind of the frustrating thing about talking about MMOs is like, what do you do? Like, I can't hype people up. Like, I don't know if Camelot Unchained is going to be a good game. I don't know that.
It's a really odd thing, because not only are you hyping something that may or may not turn out to be a colossal success or a colossal failure, but also it could change 2 weeks later. It could be completely destroyed. We've seen games get completely destroyed by a single patch. The meta gets completely messed up. They take out a certain feature, they ruin combat. I've seen games go from like mostly positive to like mostly negative in one patch on Steam and things like that. So it's an organism that is modified, sometimes to the better, sometimes to the worse. But I would like to definitely see how these guys. I mean, obviously, sadly, the Ultima Online, Richard Garriott's latest game has gotten not the greatest reception. But I mean, the guys who did EverQuest, I mean, really see what they're able to pull out of their hat. I mean, it won't obviously be the most amazing AAA 2018 presentation, but I mean, I think we're almost like I'm really hoping, I personally am, but I'm really hoping that we get past graphics, because graphics is they're great. I love seeing high quality shadows and amazing textures and scenic shots and stuff like that. But it's such an immense sinkhole of diminishing returns, for
especially in MMOs. I mean, if you want to look at EQ2 versus WoW, I mean, really at the end of the day, WoW wins because it's far more accessible in nearly every single way, including its graphics.
Yeah. I'm just like, we can get to a point where graphics are good enough to enjoy the aesthetic of, and be occasionally impressed, but you can spend so many millions of dollars getting photorealistic environments and all this other stuff, and at the end of the day, are you there for the looks, or are you there for like the actual gameplay? I mean, hopefully people are kind of waking up to it. I mean, considering that a game that looks like an NES game out of 1985 can sell 2 million copies, like Shovel Knight, I think we are kind of seeing a resurgence in people saying, hey, how about the gameplay?
I think that's because graphics are the most obvious and apparent thing. But at the end of the day, and I really truly believe this, that gameplay is what's timeless. Like the stories can sometimes seem old. Like when I go back and I watch the original Star Wars movies, I'm like, I like Star Wars, but man, these aren't so great. Like from a story perspective, like it's kind of like, man, it really gets by based on the strength of its characters and its world, and also the special effects and all of that stuff. I think that's certainly apparent when you go back and read certain stories. But gameplay, I mean, I love to bring up the example of Jedi Academy. And it's because Jedi Academy, for me, first off, the Star Wars slew of games in the early 2000s were amazing. You had Battlefront, KOTOR, you had Jedi Academy, also Jedi Outcast. There's TIE Fighter games, I think, were still coming out then as well. You had tons of Star Wars games, Rebel Alliance. What was that other game called? There's the whole Mysteries of the Sith and Jedi Knight series. Anyway, point being, Jedi Academy, if you can go watch a gameplay video of it right now, it still looks visceral. It still looks fun. And that's because it's basically a physics engine Star Wars game where you can run around, push people off of things, slice people's arms off, or slice their torsos off. It's very simple, but people are still playing the game, and they still play it in really, like, you'd be surprised at how many people still play that game. But when I go back and I play that game, even today in 2018, I still have fun. It's because the gameplay, no matter what, it's still fun to me. Like, you can't erase that fact. And it's kind of like, why is tabletop still around? It's a tried and true method. Like, it's fun. Like, it's good. You know, everyone's knocking back a couple beers or whatever else as they're going through whatever their characters are. They're going over their character sheets and stuff. Like, it's just a fun community like experience. And I'm with you that I think graphics are a trap, and that's honestly my biggest fear about Star Citizen is the graphics. I'm really trying to understand, how are they going to fit 100 people in the same system? Like, how in the same instance, let alone like system? Like, how are they going to do these sorts of things and do it with the correct performance? And that kind of brings me to the last point that I wanted to make. I know the previous one was the last one I wanted to make, and that's really, at the end of the day, it's tech limitations, right? I mean, tech limitations are the biggest barrier for the MMORPG market. You're talking about dynamic AI. We still haven't had roaming AI. We still haven't had truly dynamic AI in an MMO, and that clearly would transform the game. Because if AI could be dynamic enough to know when it should be looking for enemies to kill or looking for people to help, I mean, now the NPCs start to become less lifeless, right? And now they actually have a purpose in the world. Maybe, for example, we've flirted with this idea on the podcast before, where you could send a group of NPCs to go attack another player, and you can go a settlement, I should say, or an outpost, and you can actually go help those NPCs as well. And you're benefited by capturing more territory, getting more resources, etc., etc. But that type of AI doesn't exist at the moment. And in terms of technology, many MMOs that are launching today are still using outdated engines, first off. I mean, SWTOR has one of the worst engines ever, Hero Engine. That engine is so, like, laughably bad that it's so hard to even fix that game in any way, shape, or form because the engine is so screwed. But also, there's so many MMOs that came out back then that made their own engines that ended up failing because of that. But it almost seems like now this is the age of engines. I mean, Unreal Engine 4 is doing better than, or Unreal is doing better than it's ever done. Obviously with its Fortnite success, but also its tool sets. They sell the license pretty cheap for Unreal Engine, so most people, it's more accessible. Somebody made this point on the podcast last week. Oh, it was Spectrum, one of the guys in my chat, Spectrum. He said that now we're starting to see Unity, for example, create parcels that you can actually buy that have like online worlds. So you can actually, you know, pay a couple $1,000s to get some type of online world. So MMOs are becoming more accessible, but man, is it a slow process. I think that although MMOs have lost their RPG side in many ways, shapes, or form, the reason why I felt like it's interesting to end the discussion on this topic with you is that RPGs, I feel like, we're inexplicably linked together, because obviously the genre was called MMORPG. Like, we were meant to be a massive multiplayer role-playing game. Right now, it feels like we're just kind of massive multiplayer online games, more so than the RPG aspect. But I think getting back to the RPG, and again, as tech advances and such, there's still so much that can happen in this space. I'm not abandoning it, and I'm not giving up. I know a lot of people think, oh, it's screwed. Oh, it's, you know, all the games suck or whatever else. I'm not so doom and gloom. I think that there is positives on the horizon, and it's certainly fun to talk about. But I think we've reached the point where we're at our limit in terms of what we can actually talk about. Now we're into speculation territory, and neither of us do a whole lot of speculation.
That's true. I like to speculate. I just don't like to spend a ton of effort on a video that just ends up being like, this could be, but it also could be complete BS.
Right.
But the interesting thing, and I've actually thought about this for last few months now, the interesting thing, and this is why this is the most frustrating thing about games. We were able to do incredible, insane amounts of crazy numbers of, you know, sprites, NPCs, and worlds, and Like, I use Daggerfall a lot, sorry. But huge world, gigantic, size of bigger than England, almost 1 million NPCs, all that kind of stuff, right? Was it all completely fleshed out? No, but it was huge in there, and you think that you could just add on to that and continue to flesh it out and make it more interactive and stuff like that, right? We're not limited by technology. We haven't been for many, many years. You could run probably 500 instances of Daggerfall on any modern computer, simultaneously, if you had the right setup, right? Uh, the example I like to use is actually Dwarf Fortress. Dwarf Fortress is literally made out of text characters, like basically no graphics, right? There's been some like almost science experiments, science experiment level simulations in that game where like the NPCs would organically realize that they needed to commit genocide against a certain type of creature or a certain race in order to survive. Like actual almost societal experimentation has occurred in that game because it was basically made by like I think pretty much one guy, maybe a couple people. They focused all on mechanics. They didn't need to develop graphics. They didn't need to make a single sprite. They didn't need to make a single uh 3D model or a single level, so to speak. It was all about mechanics. Not everybody wants to look at text characters. It's a pretty ugly looking game, but the technology is there. You could make a 100% organically seamless, randomly generated world if you didn't have the hampering of, how can I get this many 3D models to run in, this small space, or how could I spend, $500 million to make all these graphics, or, all this music, or all this sound effects, or whatever, all this mocap. If you didn't have that consideration and you just programmed the logic, it can be done today. It could have been done 10 years ago.
Hmm.
That's the frustrating thing. Like,
So you think it's a priorities thing ultimately? It's just like where the
how,
priorities are lying to some extent.
yeah, kind of like, how do you meet, like intuition and presentation with actual game logic? I think that's a pretty it's a pretty deep conversation, but to have, but I think that's where we're at, because we can see incredibly complicated games come out, like Dwarf Fortress or whatever. It's been developed for like 15 years. It has these ridiculous simulation aspects, like interacting civilizations and colonies, and we see other games too, like incredibly modded versions of Civilization in the game, where they have all this really deep AI and
Right.
incredibly deep gameplay, but it doesn't look great. It doesn't play amazingly. It isn't very intuitive,
Right.
but the gameplay is there. So that's the thing. Like, what, for example, famously Todd Howard has talked about how he's not going to do Elder Scrolls 6 until the technology is there. And I can see what he means, but at the same time, it isn't true. They could have done it. They could have done it 10 years ago, but they couldn't have done it and made it look like anything decent, today. So and it's not just my speculation. I talked to Ted Peterson about this, and I asked him, "Do you think that graphics hold back gameplay?" And he said, "Absolutely." Like, when you have to constantly increase your budget, increase your development time to implement any one feature, you do uh lower the capability. Like, doing a throwaway feature all of a sudden now costs $20,000. Oh, I'm not going to add muffins, or I'm not going to add a food, or a agricultural system to this game, because that could take another year of development. Like, you all of a sudden everything becomes a choice. You have to choose. You have to now choose rather than just doing it all. And that's why we quite often see older games that are more complicated than newer games, because you could get a lot more done in a shorter amount of time. So I love beautiful, aesthetically pleasing games, but I can kind of see how the production values can kind of trump what's underneath the hood
Right.
in a lot of games nowadays. So
I think RuneScape is a perfect example of that. I mean,
yeah,
RuneScape still exists, and it's been existing now for I think like 15, 16 years or something at this point, maybe even longer than that. I think it even came out well, it's had like 3 or 4 iterations at this point. Um but I think old school RuneScape is still. I think wait, did old school RuneScape I think recently got shut down, but they still have the 2005 or 2007 version. I don't know what they call it these days, what the correct term is, but
yeah, I think it was RuneScape Classic.
Well, you turned into a robot all of a sudden.
Oh crap.
Uh-oh. He's doing a magic trick right now. He got pulled into an Atari. What? What face in chat? Well, it's on this day that we witnessed Indigo Gaming join the Illuminati. I don't know. Is he alive? We're doing all right here. He sounded like the Atari voice box thing. Oh, okay. I see what you're saying. But I think we pretty much covered all the topics that we needed to cover today, though. What do you guys think? We went over Elder Scrolls in depth. We went over Fallout 76. We went over kind of maybe bridging the gap between RPGs and MMOs and maybe what's missing, what are the problems and such. Sorry, I'm getting a message. Let me see. Oh, Windows crashed. Gotcha. Apparently his Windows crashed. So I look really weird here. Hold up. There's so many things you have to move around on stream when you do this stuff live, so sorry about that. But I think this is maybe I could wait for him to rejoin and then we could say goodbye to you guys. That'll probably be what I do. But yeah, I feel like
oh, hey, sorry, I'm on my phone. Sorry, my Windows crashed. I'm trying to boot up, but I just wanted to say sorry about that. I got cut off there, but
oh no, it's okay. I actually was about to end everything anyway, so I'll just finish it by saying, are you hearing me right now? I'm just making sure I'm coming through.
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay.
You probably can't see me, but I can hear you. Sorry about that.
Okay, yeah, no problem. I want to say, obviously, first, thanks for doing this with me. I appreciated it, and I also think that there's many other discussions to be had at other points about this topic, because I really feel like between the RPG and the MMORPG community, we can help each other out. Because I think ultimately, in different ways, we kind of want the same goal, which is the ability to truly have a game in which you can role play and be immersed into your characters and into the worlds that you join and whatever else. And if we can do that in a massive multiplayer fashion, I mean, I think we can all agree the ramifications of such. I mean, we all like to talk about The Matrix, right? Or talk about .hack or all of these other different animes where you're literally like transported into this game world and you are your character. You can actually move around and such. That's not maybe. That will happen at some point, right? Like technology will get to that point. We're going to have a holodeck at some point. We already have holograms. We've already done this. We've already done concerts with like holograms. So it's like, it's coming. It's on the horizon. But anyway, it's nice to talk to you. And for those who don't know of Indigo Gaming's content, I would certainly go watch his video on the Elder Scrolls series. He basically details how it's changed in its vision in a bunch of different ways. Obviously, it's lost a lot of key personnel and whatever else, and how the story sort of evolved. He's also done videos on Diablo. I think he did a video on Diablo 2 versus Diablo 3. You can kind of see the differences in those games. And then also the video that he mentioned earlier that he did about Fallout, where he talks about the differences in, I guess, modern day Fallout and more so classic Fallout, or I guess goes through the timeline of events of that. So go check those things out. Obviously, go to his YouTube channel if you haven't already. This video will be uploaded on my YouTube, of course, after I edit it down and everything, because I had to start and stop the channel. Sorry, someone's saying link the channel. I think someone else can do that in chat, right? Because I have like a bunch of different windows open right now, and it's currently in a way where I can't really move anything. That's why I haven't been interacting with you guys as much as I normally do. But Indigo Gaming is his tag. Indigo Gaming is the first thing that'll come up when you type it in on YouTube. So I recommend watching that type of content. I want to thank everybody else for stopping by to watch us. I know we've been going now for 3 hours and some change, so I appreciate you guys being patient and also being willing to watch. I hope you guys found something useful out of this conversation or something entertaining. And I will see you guys the normal time next week, which is Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern, which is when I normally do the podcast. I'm sure there'll be much more to talk about then. That's not just Fallout, not just Elder Scrolls, because we talk about, I guess, whatever's sort of on my mind. We didn't get to the soapbox section today, nor the call-in section, but don't worry, we'll get to that section next week. We basically figured out this whole template like the last 5 minutes, so that's why we were like 10 minutes late. I had to come up on the fly with how I was going to structure this, so this is a work in progress thing, and it always has been. But I thank all of you guys for taking the time to come watch us live. That's all I have for you guys. I'm NerdSlayer. I'm your host.
I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. Sorry, a little bit of an echo there, but I heard you. And we'll interact, I'm sure, in the future much more, and also we'll get you again on the podcast when we think we can find the most relevant time to get you in to talk about certain things. But yeah, thanks everybody for stopping by to watch us. That's all I have. I'm NerdSlayer, the host of 6 Pixels Under. This is episode 7, where we talked to Indigo Gaming about Fallout 76 and the Elder Scrolls, as well as MMOs and kind of how they all mix together. So thank you everybody for watching. I will see you guys later. Peace.